Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Rum links, 2, 3, rum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades! Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is where we watch the real far left, the farthest of the far left, the most dystopian of the dystopian. If you think you know what the left is up to, groypers, you guys have no idea about the rabbit hole that I'm about to drag all of you down tonight. And I just wonder, like, so Milk Tea Groyper and I have kind of become like, I think like uneasy alliances. Like, I unblocked him on Twitter. He's been being nice to me. Are there any other Groypers in the chat here tonight? Anyone else? For people who don't know, apparently Nick Fuentes is now my internet boyfriend. It's very scandalous, but it's an interesting development that I didn't have on my 2023 bingo card. So welcome, Groypers. As long as you're not dicks and you follow the rules, you're welcome to stay. Because the whole goal of Socialism Saturday is to show people, in the words of the actual socialists, the real far left activists. We're not dealing with CNN socialists. This is not about AOC. She's not a real socialist. This is not about Bernie Sanders, not a real socialist. Way too close to capitalism for the real socialists. We're taking you inside the real far left activists that are driving every crazy bullshit thing that you see in our culture today. If you want to know why critical race theory is all in the schools, then you have to listen to the socialists. If you want to know what queer theory really is, and no, Groypers, it's not Jewish, I'm very sorry to disappoint, you listen to the real socialists. But today, it is actually kind of funny. We're having a little bit of a crossover episode today because, of course, this week has been the week of Israel and Palestine. I just don't know how I could have possibly covered any other topic this week than one of the most controversial things, apparently, that Karl Marx ever wrote, which is called On the Jewish Question. And so this week, we are watching a presentation from our old friends at Red May. Hi, Philip. We missed you, Philip. Philip is the guy that runs Red May out in Seattle. Red May is a group of radical revolutionary socialists. And every month during the month of May, they bless us and grace us with a metric ton of real socialist programming that they put on their YouTube channel. They stream it live. Philip was so thrilled that we were stream sniping him all throughout May this year, that he tried to give me a copyright strike. It didn't work. if for no other reason than socialists are not supposed to believe in intellectual property, so that little plan didn't work. But Philip was thrilled about this. But we're really going back into the Red May archives on this one. But it was just too perfect. I couldn't help myself. This is called The Jewish Question. Literally, it is from 5 years ago, May 2018, when we were still in the land of Trump. Let's read the description. Marx's On the Jewish Question remains among the most pertinent works of his entire overture, predicting that, unlike in Europe, the United States, as the world's first secular and liberal democratic state, would in fact be engulfed in reoccurring cycles of evangelism and Protestant fundamentalism, white supremacy, which means capitalism, gripers. It doesn't have anything to do with race, it has to do with capitalism, authoritarian patriarchy, which also means capitalism, and militarized security. For Marx, these recurring cycles of what we might call violent, pathogenic white masculinity, that means capitalism, were entirely cognizant within the progressive secular state, warning radical socialist movements to think about their own complicity in preserving the structures through which the violent cycles of white male right to guns, God and war, or life, liberty, and happiness would reoccur in their pursuits for social power and state recognition. In this session, we will revisit Marx's excoriating critique of secular rights, revealing an unspoken bond between political formations on as different as U.S. Trumpian authoritarianism and radical free speech movements. Isn't that an ironic Orwellian phrase? For openness, diversity, and commons that are often the most visible critic, showing how it is this bond that recodes freedom as security and makes the victims of the U.S. permanent war in all the other places and elsewhere bloody tribute for U.S. radicals' defense of democracy. Tonight, we are delving into The Jewish Question by Marx. I didn't read this. I was thinking about reading it, and then I was like, I'm not going to torture myself with that fresh hell. But I wonder if anyone has actually read it in the chat. Let me know. Also, let me know if you're new to Socialism Saturday. If you're new here, we're going to do a little bit of a preamble before we get started, but I want to know how many new people we have for Socialism Saturday, because Socialism Saturday can actually be a bit overwhelming if you've never watched socialism with us before. I want to give you some words of wisdom to prepare you for what we're about to do. But before we do that, I do just want to remind everyone to please make sure you are subscribed to my Substack. I do apologize for the lack of content this week on my Substack. It's just been because I've been really kind of focusing on understanding the Israel-Palestine thing, which is going to be important. International stuff is not actually something that I delve into all that much, and so it has taken a little bit for me to kind of like wrap my head around it. I've been listening to a lot of Twitter Spaces, stuff like that, so I haven't been producing as much content for the Substack. I do apologize for that. I do hope to get back into the swing of things next week. I know you guys will forgive me. After all, I have been having a love affair with Nick Fuentes on Twitter, apparently. And so, some things just have to take priority. But if you do want to support the work I'm doing, then you can sign up on the Substack for $5 a month, $8. I got uber capitalist, $8 a month. Sorry. $8 a month or $80 a year. And what that gets you is access to 2 Zoom calls every single week with me and my community of supporters. We do them on Monday, and Wednesday. They are not recorded. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. We just did our monthly Bitchcraft call earlier today, which is basically an open Zoom where we do crafting and knitting. I, of course, knit, which is the far most superior of all craft. I'm working on the green band shawl right now. And some other stuff as well. We also do movie nights in our supporter Discord on Sundays at 8 p.m. And tomorrow we're going to be watching Beetlejuice in the supporter Discord, which I'm actually pretty excited about. I haven't seen it in a long time. And fun fact, the house for Beetlejuice is actually about an hour and a half away from here. It's in the communist utopia of Vermont, where they built the actual Beetlejuice house. Maybe I'll go and visit it sometime and take a picture. Who knows? But that's some of the stuff that you're going to get access to with my supporter Discord. And of course, all the support does go to fund the things that I'm trying to do, which of course I really do appreciate. Another way you can support the work I am doing is by heading over to the Unwoke art merchandise store and pick up some cool merch. Now, I've got all sorts of stuff in the merchandise store. Of course, I've got the special limited edition Trump t-shirt, which is not going to be in the store for much longer. So if you want the special limited edition Trump Indictment Victory Tour t-shirt, which on the front has Trump looking like a champion, giving the victory signal, on the back, it has every single Trump indictment, just like you would get on a concert t-shirt. That's going to be in the store for a little while longer. I also have a whole bunch of like socialist related stuff, like the Be Bourgeois shirt, which I think is pretty great. One of my favorite shirts in the entire store. We also have this one, which this shirt just feels highly relevant. I kind of put this shirt up in the store as a gag because I was so sick of other people making me responsible for their feelings. But with the amount of people who are calling me an anti-Semite this week because they can't stand if someone dare question the wisdom of a Jewish person, even if they think that Jewish person has a right to exist and defend themselves, just by merely questioning the wisdom of, blockading an entire group of people for 20 years and thinking that that's not going to result in anything. I think that a lot of people are making me and other people questioning their wisdom responsible for their feelings, Ben Shapiro. And so I do have this shirt in the Unwoke Art store. I'm not in charge of your feelings, Ben Shapiro. Get a grip, Ben Shapiro. You can wear that as well if you want to champion that. And I have this shirt too. I haven't talked to this much about this shirt, but it is actually one of my favorite designs that I've ever made using AI. And I have got a really nice like sweatshirt with it on. But I made this t-shirt because I think that we need to be sending a warning signal to all of the parents out there who don't quite realize just yet that public school is killing their children and making them into mindless queer theory drones. And so we've got this one. This is your child on public school. I think it's a great shirt. You can check that out in the Unwoke Art store. Also got a whole bunch of other merch to include mugs, to include, of course, the epic, the one, the only All Tears Are Tasty tumbler, because we just don't drink leftist tears on this channel. We drink all tears on this channel. In fact, most of the time we end up drinking conservative tears on this channel way more than leftist tears. All sorts of stuff you can check out there. And of course, all purchases in the store do go to support the work I'm doing, which I do really appreciate. Last thing before we get into it. Here's your bingo card. Let me get the bingo card over on Rumble as well. Thank you to everyone watching me over on Rumble. I'm going to pop out the chat so I can interact with you guys. This is just something to keep us focused as we are making our way into the socialist utopia of the Jewish question today. And if you want to play, you can. If you don't want to, that's fine too. Go ahead, click generate card. You get a free square in the middle. Then we're going for lines or we're going for corners as our own little version of equity. Yes, solidarity is on the bingo card twice. I mean, what's solidarity if it's not on the bingo card twice? And if you get a bingo, just let us know in the chat. You don't win anything, but you will get a hearty round of applause. And then we go for blackout bingo after that. And that's just something to keep us engaged because, guys, we are watching real socialism tonight. We are engaged in sitting our asses down for possibly several hours and watching real socialism tonight. For those of you who are new here, and again, I want to welcome anyone that's new. Socialism is interesting when you first get into it because it's going to sound like these people are speaking in like highfalutin terms. They're going to sound very flowery in their language. What you really need to understand in order to grasp socialism is that socialists are speaking in a coded language. If you don't know how to speak French and you all of a sudden get teleported into the middle of France, you aren't going to understand what the fuck these people are saying, right? Because you don't speak the language. It is the same thing with socialism. You're not going to understand what they're saying at first because it might sound like they're speaking English, but that doesn't mean they're speaking English. They are speaking a language called socialist. If you want a quick jump start to learning how to speak socialist, I do have a free webinar up on my Substack, karlin.substack.com, called How to Speak Socialist. Of course, I don't want you to leave, go and watch that right now, but just, maybe afterwards. When you kind of sit and watch socialism for a while, you learn how to speak their language. It's like, again, if you're dropped into the middle of France and you don't know how to speak French, you're going to learn how to speak French through osmosis. It's the same thing with watching socialism. So if this is your first time here watching live with us, then I want you to make sure that if you feel confused and you feel like you don't know what they're saying, it's not you. You're perfectly normal. You're not stupid. You're not hard-headed. You're not any of these things. It's just that you haven't learned how to speak the language yet. Please utilize the chat to ask questions. I will try to break down what they're saying. Remember, I'm still learning this stuff too. I've been learning this live on the internet for a little over a year now. And so I do the best I can to kind of break it down. We have very knowledgeable people in the chat that will help you learn. This is meant to be a learning experience and we do have fun. Don't get it twisted, gripers. Like, we do like to have fun, but I do just want to make clear that I do have 2 rules in my chat. Number 1, don't be a dick. Do not insult me. Do not insult other people in the chat. Just keep it cool, man. People can't learn if they're being insulted left and right. If you don't like something that someone else is saying, that's fine. You're allowed to ask questions, but I don't want the environment to be disrupted with shit posting and nonsense and bullshit and things like that. Number 2, no whining. If I ask you to stop doing something, I just need you to stop doing it. I don't want whining. I don't want complaining. I don't want backtalk. You are in my house right now. I am trying to actually accomplish something with this. It's already really complicated as it is for a lot of people to be able to learn this. So if we're having to deal with you being whiny and disruptive in the chat because you heard words you didn't like, that's just not conducive to what we're trying to do here. So we have fun. We make fun of it. I'm going to have some beer. If you're drinking something fun, put it in the chat. But this is, above all, a learning experience. We're all dedicating a Saturday night to this when we could be out doing other things. We got to make sure we're using our time well. So that's my preamble for Socialism Saturday. And again, everyone who jumps into this little adventure with us is very brave, because socialism is nothing to joke about. All right, guys. Please do mount the like button for me, if you would be so kind. If you don't feel like mounting the like button, you can caress the like button. You can make out with the like button. You can pat the like button on the back. You can shake the like button's hand. You can do whatever you want with the like button. Just don't smash it, okay? Like, we're not Neanderthals here. We don't smash things. We do things of the more adult variety. Just pick out whatever you want to do. Let us know in the chat. And guys, let's get this party started. We are watching the Jewish question. Oh, we got a super chat from Naruto before we get started. You got that super chat in right under the wire, Naruto. It's sick watching conservatives engage in collectivist thinking over Israel-Palestine. Is it ever? And the position that I'm taking on this is, listen, if you see a woke conservative, I wrote about in my book, Actively Unwoke, The Ultimate Guide for Fighting Back Against the Woke Insanity in Your Life. I wrote my book 2.5 years ago. It came out last year, because that's just the way publishing works. I wrote in my book about woke conservatives from 2.5 years ago. And when I wrote it, everyone was like, Karl, are you sure? Are you sure conservatives are woke? Are you sure conservatives are woke? And I was like, yep. And they're going to get worse. And what have we seen this week? We've seen a whole bunch of woke-ass conservatives engaging in identity politics and using leftist tactics to call every single person who disagrees with them an anti-Semite. Well, you know what, guys? If a woke conservative wants to hurl the slur at you that you're an anti-Semite because you dared question the wisdom of what Israel is doing in Palestine, you treat them like the fucking woke leftists that they are. These are not people to be taken seriously. If someone is calling you a name purely to silence you, to get you to shut up and to bend the knee to their bullshit opinions, you treat them with the righteous indignation that they damn well deserve. They're driving us into a goddamn war. There is nothing noble about the shit that Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin and all the other woke goddamn conservatives are doing on Twitter right now. They are quite literally trying to instigate a fucking war. And so I don't think that we should give them any more consideration than we give to any woke leftist. In fact, we should probably give them less, because they should damn well fucking know better. You're telling me the iconic intellectual dark web has descended into identity politics and woke tactics, and everyone just thinks this is okay? It's like the intellectual dark web never happened. It's almost like they never actually believed the things that they were saying in the first place. It is so disappointing, but if you let them get away with it, they're just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So F you guys, we don't have to bend the knee to your bullshit. No one is an anti-Semite unless they are actually calling for the elimination of Israel. Can we all just please get a grip? Am I asking too much? There are real goddamn problems in the world stemming from these people, and we are never going to be able to defeat these people if we're having to deal with the woke fucking jokers on the right. Okay? All right, let's get this party started.
No comment about.
Well, it's nice to meet everyone. I'm amazed that there's so many people here.
All right, I can already see there's going to be a problem with the sound. Okay, here's what we're going to do, because I don't have any no fancy setup or nothing. I'm going to turn down my microphone, because obviously they don't have this guy mic'd. I'm turning down my microphone, and what I need everyone to do on your own personal computer is to turn up the volume as high as you possibly can. And that way, hopefully, we will be able to hear them. I might have another solution if that's not good enough, but hopefully that will be good enough. Naruto says, it's like they never stopped being leftists. It is, Naruto. It's like they never stopped being leftists. All right, let's see if that makes the sound better.
Here on such a beautiful day. but Marx is interesting, I guess. So I wonder, maybe we could actually just start by, should we just go around and say what our names are? And actually, I have one question, which is, how many people have read on the Jewish question? Okay, so very, very few people. Okay, so I'll try to read a passage as well, so that we have something to talk about. Maybe if we're too large to all use our names, but maybe people can say who they are as they start speaking up. I will try to talk for just maybe about 20 to 30 minutes at most, and then we really could just have a conversation about how maybe Marxist discussions and the Jewish questions impact some of the conversations we're having right now. When Philip invited me to do one of the Marxathons, I proposed one term, and he said, "Oh no, someone's already doing that." And so then I said, "Well, my favorite essay in Marx is the Jewish question." So that's how I got there. And one of the reasons, one of the things I think that's important to do is to think about what it means to turn to this text at this particular moment. As I'll talk about in a moment, the core of the Jewish question is a question that Marx is addressing about the limits and possibilities of emancipation, and particularly the limits and possibilities of emancipation through the state, the demand for emancipation through the political state. In many ways, that question has only reverberated in our time as more and more groups who have been in different ways denied identity in society or have been marginalized in society's sense of identity, it's a sense of itself. We're in gay cities, so we could use homosexuality as an example, but trans bodies, trans peoples, various racialized communities, immigrant communities, and so forth, as all of the different groups who have constituted U.S. society.
Just so people who are new here know, because I can see some grapers kind of like filing in, and that's all fine, well and good. But just so you guys know, if you're new here, we often have to listen to a metric ton of word salad before they actually get to like any coherent points. And so I strongly recommend, I just poured myself a beer. It's a strawberry shortcake sour ale. It's really good. If you have a drink. Okay, I'll turn down my mic a little bit more. I'll turn it down a little bit more. There we go. So I would get a drink and a snack, have an activity that you can do, because the thing is that we only find the golden nuggets in what the socialists are saying when we actually just listen to their long form content. And it's like, what happens is you get a ton of word salad that doesn't mean shit. And then all of a sudden, bing, and they say the quiet part out loud. And it's sometimes so quick and we would miss it if we weren't watching the full form content. You got a 60-minute IPA, Dan? That sounds really great. I prefer the Dogfish Head 90-minute IPA. It's the only IPA that I've ever actually liked. Dr. Pepper and strawberry cream. That sounds interesting, other Jenny. Anyway, the point is that we have to listen to a lot of nonsense in order to get to the good stuff. That's just part of the fun and the charm of Socialism Saturday. So don't be surprised if there's just a lot of quiet moments where we're letting them work out their feelings, okay?
That have been denied the meaning of society and the identity of membership and of what it means to be, for example, American in our context. They have turned to various forms of social movements that have demanded in different ways an address from the state. And in many ways, the demand to handle and deal with marginalization and social oppression through demanding rights from the state has been one of the dominant ways social movements have imagined themselves throughout the 20th century into our present. So it's useful to go back to Marx's own thinking about this question of what does it mean to address the state for emancipation? And two, what kind of emancipation does one get when you desire political emancipation? And that is going to be the core of Marx's discussion. This question.
When they say emancipation, what do they mean? We actually haven't heard this word before, used in what I think this context is. What do they mean? Emancipated of what, do you think? Pop quiz for the chat. What do socialists want to be emancipated of? I would say to Rottweiler, I agree. I think that they're using emancipation as code for liberation. Happy Turtle on Rumble. Capitalism, freedom from capitalism, freedom from capitalism, freedom from capitalism, liberation from capitalism. Capitalism, 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 capitalism. We got a Groiper is getting the answer right. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. Capitalism. Exactly. It also might be from private property, which they use pretty much synonymously with capitalism. Why do they believe that why do socialists believe that they have to be, that the only way they can achieve quote unquote freedom is by being emancipated or liberated from capitalism? Follow-up question. Why do socialists only believe that they can be free when they are liberated or emancipated from capitalism? Because capitalism is fascism. Okay, Rottweiler, give me a little bit more. I know you know more here. Capitalism keeps oppressed people oppressed. Yes, because the proletariat is constantly working in the service of the bourgeois. Because they will only be free when they usher in their Marxist utopia. Capitalism upholds the gender binary, which keeps people down and working. Exactly. They are collectivists who reject the primacy of the individual. Yes, they do. Dialectical materialism, a philosophical approach to reality derived from the writings of Marx and Engels. For them, materialism meant that the material world has objective reality. Oh, that's a great answer. S. Stinger over on Rumble says capitalism is a rigid binary. Exactly. All great answers, guys. Here, Pizza Man. Good answer, Pizza Man. Capitalism is inherently unequal. So freedom through equality but it's not the only problem, Pizza Man, with your answer is it's not freedom through equality. It's freedom through equity. Anytime you guys hear the word equity, it means Marxism, okay? And you cannot achieve a society built on equity when you have capitalism as the driving economic force. The only way that equity can be fully achieved in America is if we wipe out capitalism, which is supported by individualism and meritocracy, and usher in the Marxist utopia, which will be grounded in the idea of equality of outcomes, which is equity. Equity cannot be achieved if you get rid, equity cannot be achieved unless you get rid of individualism and meritocracy and private property and all of those other things. Well done, guys.
What kind of emancipation is political emancipation? So let me just give you a bit of the context of the actual essay itself. The essay was written in, I think, 1843 or 1842. This is part of the early Marx, and we can talk about that in a minute. It was written as a response to the radical Hegelian theologian Bruno Bauer, B-A-U-E-R, who was addressing a kind of very, not unlike our own, fragmented radical movement in Germany. The milieu of Bauer's essay was engaging with Jewish radicals who were in part arguing for, and not just Jewish radicals, but Jewish reformers, in fact, broadly, who were arguing for political rights from the Christian state. And these were oftentimes mostly figured as
for political rights from the Christian state. This is interesting. So the only time that I ever hear socialists talk about religion is when they talk about conservative Christians as a political organizing force. And what do those conservative Christians want to uphold in the minds of socialists? Capitalism. But what's ironic about that, and what I think should be clear to everyone based on the last week, is that socialists also view Jewish people as synonymous with capitalism. Why do you think they support Palestine? Jews are the bourgeois, Palestine are the proletariat, Jews are the oppressors, Palestine is the oppressed. This is why we're seeing all these protests on college campuses in support of Hamas, which is like a terrorist organization, if we're honest about it, it is. But not all Palestinians are part of Hamas. But like it honestly has been shocking to me that more people are really confused. Like people are really confused about the fact that Black Lives Matter supports Palestine. Like, of course they do. It's the oppressor versus oppressed. Beth, thank you for the super chat. I really do appreciate it again. And yes, this is a great point, Beth, because we do have some new viewers with us. The 4 goals of the woke left are always and forever the same. Every single crazy thing that you see the left doing in this country is designed to achieve one or more of those 4 goals. That is, gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. So goal number 1, gaining power. They gain power by getting put into positions of power that they cannot be fired from. Not positions of political influence, but positions of institutional influence, like tenured professors in universities, like CEOs, like heads of nonprofits, like heads of governmental organizations that they won't be fired from on the basis of what political party is in office. This gives them power that they can use to destabilize the system. What do I mean by destabilize the system? They cause problems. Everyone, while Tim Pool seems to be still confused to this day about why the woke left veers more towards chaos, why the left supports things that are bad for society, they do that because the explicit goal is to destabilize the system. The destabilization is a feature, it is not a bug. That is what they're doing. So they gain those positions of power, they use those positions of power to cause problems that destabilize the system. Then when normal people are like, things suck. Why do things suck so badly? All these problems are happening. All this crazy shit is going on. Then the socialists come in and they go, you know who's to blame for all your problems? Capitalism. Capitalism is to blame for all of this. Capitalism is the reason that everything sucks and that you can't get ahead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they use that to achieve their third goal, which is attacking capitalism in order to basically undermine the idea of what capitalism is. And then eventually, once they have enough people in society kind of coming over to their team and saying, yeah, capitalism is really the problem here, they go, okay, how about Marxism? How about we try that? Can we try Marxism? Because capitalism didn't work, caused all these problems, even though they themselves were the ones causing the problems. Can we just try Marxism? That's how they get to their Marxist utopia. And as we're seeing over in Palestine right now, that may include violent revolution. The destabilizing of the system may include violence. We saw that in 2020. The summer of 2020, the summer of love, was all about destabilizing the system. Now, violence is not the first thing that they're going to do, because a lot of what they're going to do is going to be much more effective if they're like flying under the radar and you don't know that they're doing it. So violence is not actually the first thing they're going to do, but they are not opposed to engaging in violence at all. In fact, they do think that violence is probably going to be a part of their revolution, but it's not always a part of it. But like, again, I don't know why people are so surprised that this is, they are literally calling for a revolution, guys. They use that word specifically. So again, if you're new, the 4 goals of the woke left, and if you memorize these and you keep them in the back of your head, I promise you're going to see it showing up over and over again. Gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. Everything they do is designed to achieve one or more of those 4 goals. Thank you, Beth, for the super chat. I really do appreciate it.
Negative rights, rights of freedom to practice religion, for example, but also equal rights of membership in society, so forth. Up until this time in Germany, Jewish communities are regulated not through equal rights in the state, but through what Marx is calling and Bauer calls a series of privileges that are bestowed. A lot like, for example, how undocumented people live in the U.S. You have the privilege of having a driver's license. You have the privilege of day labor and so forth, but you're not fully vested with rights. So it's in this context that Bruno Bauer responds to the reformist Jewish movement and says to them, you want rights in the Christian state, and you are seeking rights for yourself, and you're asking all of the radical left to join you in your particularistic desire.
Radical means socialist.
It's like asking, for example, gays and lesbians asking the trade unions and the labor left to participate in their.
You know what's funny about this? Do you notice that he just said gays and lesbians? Does anyone want to guess why he just used the term gays and lesbians? This is a small thing, but I do think this is actually telling. Remember, this was 5 years ago. This presentation is older. 5 years ago. This was before the non-binary queer explosion. So the fact that he's saying gay and lesbian instead of queer, that's a reflection of the fact that this was 5 years ago, and they hadn't yet fully kind of like pushed their language into push the language around queer and non-binary and homonormativity and heteronormativity and cis heteronormativity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They hadn't changed the language yet. If this presentation was done today, he would not have said gay and lesbian. He would have said queer.
Rights to sexuality and sexual freedom, decriminalization of sodomy, for example, at the time. So in a very similar way, he's saying you guys are asking for your rights, but why should we listen? Because you're asking for rights for yourself and not for the whole of society. And what you're actually asking for are Jewish rights to be a participant in the Christian state, but you haven't undone everyone's subjection to the authority of the Christian state itself. And so for Bauer, he sort of says, the problem with demanding particularistic rights or group rights, that's language we might use today. The problem of demanding group rights like Jewish rights is that it leaves intact the character of the state. Hang
on, Steve. I know you're new here. You haven't learned this yet, but this is not correct. Obama's who's behind this gay marriage transgenderism. No, he's not, Steve. I'm sorry. This came long before Obama. Like this predates him by, we're talking decades here. And all of this has been building for a really long time. From the Marxist march through the institutions, they've been trying to push queer stuff since like, it was funny at the socialism conference. I went to this one lecture where this guy was talking about queer like through the ages. They were pushing queer theory like in the same way that we understand it now, which is all about destabilizing the system. There was writings on queer theory that go back to the 50s and the 60s that were coming out of this group. I know because this guy wrote a whole book about it, and he talked about it. So this did not start with Obama. It did not start there at all. It's been building for a really long time. I appreciate you coming today, though. Hopefully we can learn some stuff.
Of inclusionary politics, and that we should not participate in those kinds of coalitions, but only movements that argue for a absolute transformation and ending of the state as we know it. That it would be a collective emancipation, is the only movement we should have coalitions around. So Bauer says to them, if you're willing to give up your Jewishness and demand the rights of all secular people to the secular state, we will participate. We will not support Jewish rights, emancipatory rights, because he says those are just the continuation of religious rights. And if you demand the right of religiosity, then what is wrong with the state demanding its own right to be a Christian state?
Thank you, Gene. I'll look into
that. So only if you can participate in a broad conception of universal change, or universal rights, that would affect everyone, can your rights also be transformed? And so that's sort of Bauer's argument, is that what we need is not more rights for minoritized groups like Jews in this moment, but what we need is an abolition of the religious state itself, and the transformation of the state into a...
By religious state, he doesn't actually mean religious state, he means capitalist state. Because again, like, I don't think that this has changed that much since 2018. They do not view conservative Christians as a religious group so much as they view them as a political organizing force.
Secular state. And this was
recorded in May of 2018, so it's a little bit older, Texas gal.
Very much an active possibility, as Marx and Bauer are both noting, in the period that they're writing, because two secular states have just emerged in Western society. One, of course, is the French state, which is a constitutional state with still a Christian character, so it's a partial secular state.
Hang on, Tori, I think this is a fair question. Okay, so I want to remind everyone that how I analyze socialism is I listen to their practical lectures. I don't read their philosophy. I'm trying to understand what real socialist activists believe and what they're teaching each other. So the philosophy of like Marcuse and Hegel and Marx and Engels and all that stuff, and it might say something different, and I'd welcome people putting that in the chat if it does. I am only speaking to what I have heard socialists say in their actual boots on the ground training, right? Are they for or against the freedom to worship? They don't really seem to care, to be honest. They never talk about the elimination of religion from people's lives. It is true that many of them are atheists, but not all of them are atheists. There are absolutely socialists who have some religious faith, but not many of them do. And it's not even just Christianity or Judaism or any of that. It's like a wide variety of beliefs. They aren't against people having religion. The only context in which I hear them talking about religion, again, is they talk about the political organizing force of conservative Christians. So they don't care so much that they're Christians. They care about what they're doing to legislate their Christianity. Does that make sense? Akshay said, Marx had a Jewish lineage but never practiced Judaism. He hated the Jews in the spiritual sense, but not the ethnic sense.
And Marx will talk about the Universal Declarations of Rights of Man through it. But the one that is, according to Marx, a truly secular state that has abolished any religious character to its own state is the American Revolution and the U.S. Constitution. And in the U.S., for the first time, European society has constructed a non-religious state.
Well, actually, Gray One, this is a really good point that I didn't think of. These people have no problem with churches who adopt queer theory. Like, if people haven't looked at my stuff on queer theory, I did an expose on the queer theory, the queer ideology stuff coming out of the Toronto School of Theology a couple months back. It's crazy. We're talking about gangbangs with God and like all the like Christian BDSM clubs and all this stuff, and it's nuts. But like there are queer Marxists that go on like tours around different churches to preach queer Marxism in the churches. You can find them all on YouTube. And so you're absolutely right about this in that they do not care. They would absolutely be okay if a church embraced queer theory. Well, again, this is a right-wing talking point, Lita. This is not a left-wing talking point. This is a right-wing talking point, and we distinguish between those on this channel because a lot of conservative Christians like to get their little victim martyr complex out. And because I'm convinced that conservative Christians have like a persecution fetish, and you're like, we are the poor persecuted victims of society. Well, okay, no, you're not. Relax. They don't seem to believe this because they don't talk about it. They don't write books about it. They don't give lectures about it. So this may have some truth in practice, but what I'm telling you is they do not believe it, and they do not talk about it, and they do not preach it, and they're not doing anything about it, because when these people are focused on a topic, you hear about it all the effing time. So this is a right-wing talking point. This is not a left-wing talking point. Exactly. That's why they've trained liberation theologians for over 50 years in order to infiltrate and subvert the churches. I'm not arguing they're not trying to subvert the churches. I think what they're trying to do is, again, the thing that they're really worried about when it comes to religion is religion as a political organizing force that is going to take power away from them. So what are they doing? They're infiltrating the political organizing force in order to hijack it and use it for their purposes so that they can gain more power, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. So if anything, what the queer Marxists are what any Marxists, not just the queer ones, what the Marxists are trying to do is hijack religion so they can utilize the political organizing force that they perceive it to be.
For the first time, European society has discovered what we might think of as universal human rights and a form of state that is predicated upon human community or what makes us what we all share as humans, rather than various forms of religious authority. Now, what Marx does is he turns to, in responding to Bauer, Bauer's argument basically is saying, look, what we need to do is make all of Europe into America. We need to make all the other European states into secular states. And we need to get rid of the religious character of the state itself. And part of Bauer's argument about getting rid of the religious...
There it is, getting rid of the religious character of the state. Now, I would argue that no matter what you think, Grapers, and I'm sorry, we're just going to have to agree to disagree on this. America's not a Christian nation. We have a First Amendment, children. I don't care if you're Christian, but I don't have to be Christian. But anyway.
Character of the state itself is that if you abolish the religious character of the state, you also enable people to see their true identities as fellow peoples, as part of a shared human community. That religiosity it continues to divide what we share, and that it's only a state that's predicated upon what is universally true, that can allow all citizens to see their own universality and connect with each other on those horizontal relations of being part of the human together, rather than in these religious divisions. I'm Christian and you're Jewish, or I'm Hindu and you're Muslim, etc. You see yourself as actually part of the human community. Now, Marx says that's an interesting concept, but look what's happening in the United States. What's happening in the United States in the period that Marx is thinking, and this is in the 1830s, is very fascinating because the US is going through massive religious revivalisms, right? There are these are like circus shows. They're traveling all across the United States, yeah? And Marx actually says, he's actually quoting Beaumont. Beaumont is a French intellectual who's coming to the United States as a kind of a observer of this new kind of experiment in American democracy. And he says, Beaumont says, oh my God, America is so odd and paradoxical because when the businessman fails, he becomes a preacher. And when the preacher is really doing his job and speaking to God, he's an excellent businessman. Because he is going around and seeing all of these forms. There's all these kinds of religious revivalisms that are going on. And so, in a way, Marx says, there's a paradox here, which is why is it that the state that appears to be most secular, the state that appears to have finally been predicated not upon whether you're Christian or part of this or that religious community, but really a state that's predicated upon what makes us all humans, why is it that that country is the one that is having religiosity at testosterone levels? Yeah, that is just that in which what it means to be American is in part to have these vital practices of your religious identity in the public sphere. Not just, kind of quiet, private religiosity, but just this absolutely durative kind of intense forms of religious community and religious life. So Marx is kind of using that historical paradox a moment to walk into a discussion that he's going to have about the so-called Jewish question. What I think is really interesting about just the phrasing of the essay itself is that we already know we're dealing with some kind of logic that secretly affirms one system of society and is having to figure out how to manage the demands of an excluded member of that society as they want in. So in other words, the essay itself is on the Jewish question. It's not, for example, the essay could have been, the whole of German society could have written the essay that could have had this whole conversation about Jewish inclusion in the state as something like,
does anyone know offhand what year Marx wrote the essay on the Jewish question? I know I could look it up, but I'm like knitting right now. Yes, I'm knitting the band shawl. Can you look that up for me? What year was the essay written on the Jewish question? I appreciate it. And in the meantime, we're going to go to Tune In, Drop Out. Thank you. How does he square universal truth as essential for the state with postmodern socialist idea that there are no universal truths? I don't agree with the premise, I guess. And again, guys, I'm going based off of what they're teaching each other in their classes. I'm not going based off of the philosophy. I'm going based off of what they're teaching each other. I don't know that I have actually heard them, and I've watched thousands of hours of this stuff at this point. I cannot think of an instance in which I've heard them teach that there is no universal truth. I think that is a right-wing interpretation of what they're doing, not a reflection of what they're actually doing. Now, they will acknowledge that there are different perspectives to the issue, but I think that that's more a matter of like, socialists tend to look at things in a lot more of a nuanced way than conservatives do, in that they're kind of like, you can look at it from this angle, you can look at it from that angle, which honestly, sorry, conservatives, is like a smart thing to do. but I don't think that's a reflection, at least not in the things that I've heard, of them not believing that there is truth. Now, they're not going to see the world like you do, conservatives. They're not going to see it in terms of the black and white thinking that you see on the right. But I would not characterize at least what I've heard in this way. But I do appreciate the super chat. Milk Tea Groiper, thank you for the super sticker. I do appreciate it. What does the sticker look like? Oh, it's hearts. Oh, isn't that sweet? Isn't that lovely? Thank you. Carlin, can I call the shawl the Groiper shawl? Yeah, fine. Why not? Why not? We're already going down this road. Why not? It's got a Nazi symbol on it. It's obviously a Groiper shawl. All right, let's keep going.
On the German question.
Thank you, guys. 1843. Thank you.
The German question is not the problem. The problem is the Jewish question. And you're going to see this over, that's probably my phone. You're going to see this over and over again. So for example, another essay that we could have paired with this essay that would have worked really well, if we had time, is W.E.B. Du Bois's 1903 essay called The Souls of Black Folk. And if you recall that, if you know that book, and if you haven't, you should read it. You'll love it. It's incredible. Overlap with Marx's account here. But in Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk, he's writing in 1903. He's writing just after the 30 years into the emancipation, 40 years into the emancipation of
the ironic thing about the green color of the shawl is this wasn't even the color that I was going to originally knit it with. I wanted the red knitting kit. There was a beautiful red knitting kit that had this red that was kind of like the color of my hat, and that was the one that I actually wanted. But by the time I logged onto the website, they were sold out of that one, and the green kit that I ended up getting was just like my favorite of what was available. I was like, I haven't knitted a green shawl in a while. Why don't I do this kit? And now, of course, we know that it was meant to be a Groiper shawl all along. There are no mistakes. The universe doesn't make mistakes. There are no coincidences. And it's turning out great. I'm actually really enjoying the green. I haven't used green in a while.
Of African Americans as former enslaved people, as citizens. And he says, and he's like going to all of these, he's a northern intellectual, he's in DC and in New York, and he's a scholar, so he's in academic communities, and he's going to all of these very scholarly conversations and all of these middle class households and so on. And he says, on the tip of everyone's tongues are this and that problem about post-emancipation America. What do we do with the crime problem? What do we do with rampant immorality? What do we do with, people just walking away from jobs when they feel like it, their laziness, in other words. And he says, these are all liberals. And he says, and really what they're asking me all the time is, how does it feel to be a question? And of course, the question for Du Bois is the Negro question. That the United States, at the moment that African Americans gain political emancipation, the whole conversation becomes, how do we deal with the Negro question, right? So, and you can think similarly about the ways, for example, when women demand suffrage in the 19th century, it's not a conversation about the universal right to vote, it's a conversation about the woman question. Right. So just the structure of the question is part of the problem. And that will be one of the things that both Bauer and Marx will critique. They'll say, look, this is Bauer's point. He's saying, you don't want to be a question. You don't want it to be the Jewish question or the Negro question or the woman question. You want to show that the question is preserving somebody else's majoritarianism. And so what you want to do is get rid of the question and ask a different question. And so for Bauer...
Did you hear what he just said? The question is about preserving someone else's majoritarianism. And so their answer is to get rid of the question. What he just said is like, it's about equity. They want to make the world a more equitable society. They want to get rid of hierarchies. That's what he's talking about.
That different question is secularism, a universal secular state based upon human emancipation. Now, we'll talk about how, political emancipation. We'll talk about how Marx addresses this in a moment, but I wanted to just situate, before I can quote something from Marx, where this fits into Marx's oeuvre.
Hang on, Pizza Man asks a great question. So they want equity throughout every domain. Yes, that is exactly right. Because Marxism, socialism, communism, and I use those three interchangeably because they use them interchangeably, is a world in which everyone is on the same okay. Let me clarify. The idealized version that they try to sell is that Marxism, socialism, communism is a world in which everyone is on the same level. There is no hierarchy. There's no bourgeois. There's no private property. So there's no private businesses. So there's no profit motive. Everything that's produced in society is for everyone. The government will provide you with everything you need, from your housing to your job, your assigned job, of course, that you don't get to pick out, to your food. They want to get rid of kitchens in private households because they want everyone to go to the communal area to get food. They want to, the government's going to be in charge of raising all the kids because they consider kids to be private property of their parents, and it's their job to liberate the children from being private property of their parents. And so in theory, of course, this is not how it would work in practice, but in theory, they think this will mean everyone is on the same level. And they want that through. This is why you're seeing equity show up everywhere. Every single time you see. So equity is essentially the idea of equality is equality of opportunity. That's what we want. That's individualism. That's meritocracy. That's what upholds capitalism. Equity, which is eerily similar to equality, which is why people get the two terms confused. Equity is about equality of outcome. Everyone ends at the same place. That's what they want. They do not want equality. They want equity. And they want it in everything. And this is why you see equity showing up everywhere. Every organization has a diversity and equity office. There's whole diversity and equity initiatives in the federal government. Every single military academy has to go through equity training. Every single school has diversity and equity. Look up educational equity on YouTube sometimes, see what comes up. So that's what that's about. They want it in everything, and they're winning. Tune in, drop out. Thank you for the super chat. So creating a universal secular state is their universal truth? No. I wouldn't phrase it like that because I think that I wouldn't. Again, it's like they don't actually really care about religion is the thing. They don't really care about it other than a political organizing force. What they really care about is eliminating private property and eliminating capitalism by virtue of eliminating private property. So I'm not sure I would agree with this. Maybe, though. I'm going to think about that. Thank you for the super chat. No, the cult cannot have a DEI coordinator.
So this is part of the early Marx. Much of the early Marx, all of these writings, this one was actually published in the Deutsche Französische Realschule, which was a kind, it only had one issue, but it's like a viewpoint magazine. It was a very, very vital magazine for an active left in Germany at the time, where these questions got debated. But most of the writings of this earlier period of Marx were actually lost until the 1960s. And most of them were not published until...
This is not a fucking democracy, bot. This is a fucking monarchy, okay? And I am the queen. You don't get a vote. What I say goes.
Marx was long gone. And many of them were rediscovered in the 60s. And they actually vitalized a new form of Marxist criticism. Because in this earlier period, Marx is very different than the late Marx. Many of the people who love Capital hate these texts, for example. They find these texts to be immature. They find these texts to be unscientific. They find these texts to be, in some ways...
Pizza Man asks, what are those 4 goals again? gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. I have several articles on my Substack about this, which is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I think I also have some videos on YouTube, some clip videos talking about it more, but those are the 4 goals: gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. Thank you for asking.
Too involved in what May would call
Not yet.
superstructure,
Maybe
too
soon.
involved
Maybe
in
soon.
the world of politics and the law and cultural conflicts, and not enough in the science of economy. And so these are in many ways the lost Marx that has been rehabilitated since the 1960s. And in some ways, as we read them, we are all marked by the ways that they came back into society, which again is through the 60s social movement and its impact, particularly on French intellectuals that we then inherit in the US. Talk about that separately if you want. But what I do want to say about this early period of Marx is at this period, in many ways, really enchanted by ethnography and anthropology. And in fact, religious anthropology is going to be a very central place where he learns a lot of what he's going to do with the Jewish question. And I'll talk about that momentarily. But for Marx, the core of historical materialism is the belief that history is always the history of the social production of the necessities of life. So unlike liberal histories, which are most oftentimes histories of great ideas, histories of transformations in consciousness. So for example, a liberal history would be a history of how we got the French Constitution.
Hang on. I want to take this super chat from Mountain Goddess. Thank you, Mountain Goddess. Who funds these programs as long as they've been taught to U.S. citizens? Do they believe in entrepreneurship? Who funds these programs? I mean, the government funds the programs today. I mean, most of these programs are funded by taxpayer dollars. If it's in the government, it's funded by taxpayer dollars. If it's in universities, state-funded universities, it's funded by taxpayer dollars. If it's in private universities, it's funded by private tuition. If it's in private business, it's funded by the private businesses. But like a lot of this stuff is fun. If it's in schools, it's funded by taxpayer dollars. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it's funded by public money. I mean, just look at, like, there's a Twitter account. Oh gosh, what is his name? I'm going to look him up on the stream. Rando something. I don't remember exactly. But there's this Twitter account that all it does is tweet out like government contracts and grants for like equity programs. And we are spending tens of millions of dollars of our taxpayer money a year funding equity programs that are completely designed to overthrow the system of capitalism in our society by destabilizing belief in it. It's unbelievable. How long has this been taught to U.S. citizens? At least 100 years, if not longer. They started by taking over the colleges and universities. Through the colleges and universities, they got to the K through 12 schools. They completed their long march through the institutions around about 2010 or so. But this has been taught to U.S. citizens for at least, really pervasively for at least 3 generations at this point, which is part of the problem. Do they believe in entrepreneurship? No. Because socialists do not believe in private property. Socialists do not believe that you should be able to own your own private business. Socialists don't even believe you should be able to own your own home. They don't believe you should have a private kitchen in your home. They don't believe that the nuclear family should exist. They do not believe that parents have parental rights over their children, because socialists believe that, much like Scientologists, socialists believe that children are but little people and like they're little adults in little childlike bodies, but they're not actually children. They're like adults who can make all their own decisions. And so why should parental rights exist? Because kids can make their own decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So do they believe in entrepreneurship? Absolutely not. You would absolutely not be allowed. Not only would you not be allowed to own private property, you would absolutely not be allowed to have your own private business, because that would be grounded in individualism and meritocracy. That would put you as part of the bourgeois. The bourgeois is evil. That is what they're trying to eradicate. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Thank you for the super sticker. I do appreciate it. Let's see.
It would be a history of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton and all of the different intellectuals who created our liberal doctrines. And it would be a history of their ideas, in a sense, a history of their thoughts. Now, against these conceptions of histories for Marx, history was always a history first and foremost of the social production of life. And what is very important about that conception of history is the concept.
Aha, Pizza Man. Yes, indeed it is, because socialists do not believe in the age of consent. I got some really shocking recordings from the socialism conference that I went to undercover a little over a month ago that was all about, they had a whole section called The Politics of Childhood, in which there were questions asked about eliminating the age of consent and all that sort of thing. Yeah, socialists don't believe in the age of consent at all. Now, to be fair, I'm a libertarian and we don't believe in the age of consent either, but our non-belief in it is more that we don't believe the government should exist. And so the government shouldn't be making laws for anything. And there are lots of discussions in libertarian spaces about, like, how do you protect children without, like, a government enforcing that particular, because we don't believe the government should exist, right? And so it's a different type of age of like in socialist circles when they're talking about age of consent, it's, well, kids have minds of their own and really they should be able to make adult decisions because they're just little adults and little bodies and they have minds of their own and they know what they want. That is a very different conversation than what libertarians do, which is, how do we eliminate as much of the government as humanly possible while still putting frameworks in place in society to prevent abuse and that sort of thing.
Of the social. So for Marx, the core of historical materialism is that there is no form of making and sustaining life that doesn't require social relations. Bless you.
Sorry.
No problem. That doesn't require social relations. And so the elementary social form for Marx is the relations between men and women as the sexual relation that produces life itself. So that's his first example. He says, look, what it means to have life is that you.
Yes, when Eliza Bleu had a quote taken out of context and spread all over the internet, like in epic bullshit fashion, this is what she was talking about. And this is the age of consent conversation in like libertarian circles. It happens all the effing time. It is not like, it's not like, it is an ongoing, it's like a philosophical discussion. It's like a thought exercise. And so this is exactly what happened to Eliza Bleu, in that she was having the conversation of like, how do we protect kids without having a government? That's exactly what happened. You're right.
You are not in charge of your life, which is how the liberals believe it, but that you, through a relationship, have been produced. So men can only produce life through women and vice versa. And so all life is the accomplishment of a social dynamic. And what history is for Marx, and this is what the historical of materialism part is, what history is for Marx is how those social relations are organized. So, for example, in the case again of sexual reproduction, the actual making of life itself is only possible in a social relationship.
Yo, bro, no. Take it down a notch, bro. Just take it down a notch. First of all, I can't read that. I'm not going to sit here, like, I'm not going to decipher this code that you've put in to be able to excise your feelings in my chat. Just take it down a notch. That's all I'm asking.
Now we're in an interesting moment. Elise works on this, so she can talk about this. We're in an interesting moment where people can commodify these things, so you believe that you can make life without another human being, but only if you believe the trick of the commodity. But for the most part, up until we had alienable sperm and surrogacy and so forth, all life required a social relation. And whatever was the form that relation took was the form of that society's history. So if those social relations, for example, were patriarchal, then the production of life happened under patriarchy. If those social relations were matriarchal, then the production of life happened under matriarchy. But for Marx, also, these elementary social organizations keep on expanding in more complexity, and it's their expansion into higher levels of complexity that is the history, that is history itself. So, so life goes from in Marx, the account is it's stagist only because he's just trying to give you an example of how this works. He doesn't necessarily believe this, but he basically says, look, life goes from the relations between men and women in the production of human life itself. Then they move out into the relations of the household, in which you have multiple different members of the household. You have, for example, in the Roman household, slaves, you have women, you have children, you have the whole world of the social production of life necessities, the oikos, and the oikos, which is the Greek word for household, is a really good example of this because it's also the term that we get for economy. So the household is actually the place in which you learn to manage the social relations needed to survive
hang
through
on.
a year, right? So
Hang on. Check this out. Okay. As preface for anyone that might be new here, socialists really do want to abolish the nuclear family. That's very real. I have covered it probably more than anyone else on the internet. I have an extensive archives of episodes. Just go into my channel, search Abolish the Family. You will get a whole metric ton of stuff. You will be introduced to our goddess queen, the ginger dragon, Sophie, who is my far left person that has a crush on me, not to be confused with Nick Fuentes, who is the far right person that has a crush on me. Like, I get them from all sides. It's cool. Anyway, socialists really do want to abolish the family. Sophie is one of the key abolish the family activists that we've covered extensively. The reason I bring this up, and the reason that socialists want to abolish the nuclear family, is that they believe that the nuclear family upholds capitalism, because through social reproduction theory, the nuclear family socially reproduces capitalism. And so in order to eliminate capitalism, they have to eliminate the nuclear family, because as long as the nuclear family exists, then capitalism will exist because of social reproduction theory. I want you to listen to what he just said. He just said, economy what did he say specifically? Hang on. The Greek word for household is economy. This is what he just said. The Greek word for household is economy. Let's listen.
Women, you have children, you have the whole world of the social production of life necessities, the oikos, and the oikos, which is the Greek word for household, is a really good example of this because it's also the term that we get for economy. So the household is actually the place in which you learn to manage the social relations needed to survive through a year, right? So an economy of household is like, do we have enough grains for us to get through winter? And all of those relations, those social forms that form a society that's going to produce the oikos, is again, social organization. So for Marx, historical materialism is the history of the changes in the social production of the necessities for the maintenance of life. In many ways, all of society's social forms come from these social productions of life. So feudalism, for example, in Marx's account, comes up with the conception of property. It's a moral economy that corresponds to feudalist modes of producing life's necessities. And what is unique about capitalism, or what is unique about modernity's emergence, is that a new system of production is created for the maintenance and development of social life. And that system of production is, of course...
That was just a call for abolishing the family. Did everyone hear that? We have to create a new system of production for the development of social life, to replace the old system of development for social life, which is the family, the household, the private household. Let's listen again.
Capitalism, or what is unique about modernity's emergence, is that a new system of production is created for the maintenance and development of social life. And that system of production is, of course, the industrial mode of production. But that is just one system
The
of
village,
production.
exactly. The village. We are going to go from the private nuclear family to the village, or dare I say, the commune.
Of life's necessities. Yeah, and for Marx, all of the social forms that come into existence are only there because they enable a particular way of producing life. So, in the case of our societies, in the case of capitalist societies, industrial modes of production, it's the set of property relations that allow for the industrial mode of production that organizes the social forms that we live under and experience. Yeah. So in other words, in this account of Marxism, he hasn't discovered value yet. Doesn't know what it is. He only has discovered this idea of historical materialism, that the system of the production of life's necessities will produce.
Well, Mountain Goddess says, this reminds me of the Jim Jones cult in Guyana. My aunt was part of the people. Seriously, your aunt was in that? Well, there's a reason it reminds you of that, Mountain Goddess, because that was a socialist commune. One of the first introductions that any of us have to, like, the real life utopia, it's going to be Jim Jones and the People's Temple. Oh, come on. I loved The Village. I disagree. Rottweiler, we're going to fight over this. M. Night Shyamalan is fucking great. The Village, Unbreakable. Well, no, yes, that's what it was called. Like, the second one he did, that was actually my favorite one. But, like, I thought The Village was great. Come on. The Mark Wahlberg one, not so much. The one where like, everyone was suddenly killing themselves, that kind of sucked. It could have been so much better. What other ones did he do? I didn't like The Sixth Sense. I actually thought The Sixth Sense was way overrated. Unbreakable was the second one. That one was really good. I thought The Village was really good. I thought the ones about aliens were really good. I think the one he did with, like, the multiple personality one, I thought that was great. Now, why are we being rude? What is the point of this? There's no point of this, bro. Goodbye. Thank you for stopping by and waiting 5 minutes, but now you can leave. Signs. Yes, Signs. Signs was really good.
Use the social forms necessary for that system of production, and it's really in this context that he's writing The Jewish Question. Now, the other thing that Marx is learning from is from religious anthropology in this period, and and Bauer is a part of this kind of radical anthropology of religion theology.
Hang on.
And
Honest Dog Allison. The socialist equates the family and reproduction with the word industry because the nuclear family and the reproduction of children within the nuclear family upholds capitalism. Very good.
For all of them, what they believe at this particular moment, and Marx's idea of commodity fetishism will come from his reading of this religious anthropology as well, but he doesn't have it yet. But what he does have is that these anthropologists all say, look, religiosity is a ruse. Like, why? So modernity is all about people sort of kind of breaking with the fetters of backwardness and learning your true emancipation, your true freedom, your real human identity. And for them, what they saw is that religion is just another way in which people misrecognized life's necessities. So let me clarify that for a second. So in other words, what religion was for these groups of anthropologists is they said everyone worships God. And they have a whole set of rules that they put forms of obedience and forms of duty, and that they experience because of their beliefs.
You know what movie I'm thinking about right now? And this is just a random thought, but it's just like I've got it in my head now, and I like want to watch it after this. What is that movie that was that was an homage to Cannibal Holocaust? The Green Inferno. The Green Inferno is a great, if you're looking for like a good gory like torture porn movie, The Green Inferno, and Cannibal Holocaust too. If you've never seen Cannibal Holocaust, it is a classic. It's an intense movie, but like Green Inferno is a great fucking movie. I might watch that later because I like that sort of thing. Anyway, The Green Inferno is what I would like to do to these people on any given day. I suppose that's the connection.
But for these anthropologists, what God was merely the externalized, imaginary experience of the social community. So again, if you think about a system of production, we all think that we walk in the world as individual beings. But actually, the only way we will be sustained is if we're in relations with one another. And what religion was for these people was just the alienated expression of those relationships. So everyone put their collective will.
Isn't that interesting? Okay. So they're saying that like people are using religion as a way to relate to one another, but they're kind of using religion in like a bastardized way in order to like the whole point of like socialist right is they believe in the collective. They don't believe in the individual. They believe everyone is part of the collective. Everyone should operate as part of the collective. And what he's basically saying is like religion is kind of like they're trying to get to that collective, but it's like a bastardized way of getting to the collective, I think. That's interesting.
Towards this thing called God. And it was that collective will called God that they obeyed. And through obeying or being obedient to that collective will, they had community. And through community, they were able to produce the social necessities of life. So for these thinkers, religion itself was an alienated moment in human consciousness. Religion was you still did not know that what made you possible was your relationship to others. That what made you possible was not that you were in a vertical relationship with kings and vassals and serfs and so forth, but that you were in horizontal relations with others. And the only evidence that people, the only version of that horizontality was the shared belief in God. And so for this cohort, what they all saw was that religiosity was itself an alienated expression of our actual communal wholeness. That if we could actually see that we were in a shared system of production, we would no longer need God. Because we would see that it's our community.
Yeah, I agree, Rottweiler.
Our general will, and not an external authority that creates our general will. So that's the kind of the context of this moment. Now, Marx is interesting in how he comes into this conversation because he makes a few points I've already spoken too much, so I'll try to be quick. He makes a few points. He says, one, he says, he looks at the European Christian state, and he looks at what happens in the United States, and what's happening particularly before in France. And he says, one of the things that we have to know is that the secular state is actually still an outgrowth of the European Christian state. It's not really secular. It's not really secular, meaning it hasn't lost its European Christian character.
That means capitalism. That means capitalism. It's still too close to capitalism.
All it's done is transformed, because remember, he's an anthropologist at this moment, right? So what it means to have a Christian God is that you live in Christian society, right? And you live in all of the hierarchies and authorities of Christian society, including, for example, how Christianity sees Jews. So what he says is, first and foremost, secular society, and this I think is something very important if you think about contemporary Islamophobia, secular society is not actually non-Christian. It's just Christian society rationalized into secular concepts. And
Pizza Man says, do they have citations for this? Or are all these just assertions? I've heard them say anthropologists. Are there anthro studies they're using to justify this? In all likelihood, yes, because oftentimes what socialists will do when they're doing a lecture like this is they're basically just, he doesn't seem to be doing this, but oftentimes they're like reading off of an academic paper. There is likely citations that he can provide. Will he provide them in this talk? Probably not, because that's just not the type of talk that this is. But generally speaking, they have citations to back everything up. However, you got to keep in mind, these people control our entire academic apparatus, right? And so, like, you can find a citation for anything. You can literally, like, my dissertation advisor told me this, like, if you want to find a citation to back something up, you can find a citation to back something up. And because these people control all of academia, they control all of the major peer-reviewed journals, you're not going to get something published unless you're playing by their bullshit rules. And so, does he have citations? I mean, probably. Are those citations any good? I don't know.
The best expression of this is that under Christianity emerges the concept of private belief, or belief itself, so that religiosity is in the space of belief and not necessarily.
Check this out. Under Christianity emerges the concept of private belief. Remember, these people do not want private property to exist. Apparently, they don't want the private family to exist. Apparently, they don't even want you to be able to have your own private belief, because they're saying that Christianity encourages private belief, which is probably code for individualism, because you're not allowed to have, you're not allowed to have your own individualistic beliefs. You're supposed to see yourself as part of the collective. Pizza Man, what would I study justifying social alienation as proof of religious impulse even look like? I don't know, bro, but I bet they have it. I mean, lived experience probably is probably be a qualitative study, which like, I'm a qualitative researcher, so I'm not shitting on qualitative research, but qualitative research can pretty much say whatever you want it to say, depending on your inclusion-exclusion criteria and how you're framing the questions for it. So I'm going to bet it's going to be a qualitative study about lived experience, something or other, and it's going to be like in an anthropology department or a sociology department where they don't really have any standards for how they're doing this stuff, would be my best guess. No private thought. Christianity equals private belief equals bad.
Or belief itself, so that religiosity is in the space of belief and not necessarily, you can experience religiosity while still leading a secular life. So you can, do all kinds of things, even though, for example, Puritans are an interesting example in Weber's work, because he really is thinking about their whole experience of Christianity. But in this example, he's sort of saying, look, you can lead very profane lives, but if you have belief, you're still Christian. And so this Christian concept of belief becomes very central, because it's what gets secularized as private rights. So the secular state that you and I know is a state that hasn't released itself from Christianity. It's generalized the Christian structure of religion upon everyone. So if you have a religious identity that can be translated into belief, you're going to be fine under a secular state. But if your religious identity exceeds the space of belief and goes into domains of social practice, you're going to start seeing the breakdown of the secular state. So a great example of this that's so easy, since Elise and I teach at UW, is how they have to handle Jewish holidays.
They teach at the University of Washington. Oh, we've watched multiple professors on Socialism Saturday that have taught at the University of Washington. I know we're all shocked that socialists are teaching at major publicly funded, taxpayer-funded universities. I know none of us saw that coming.
Right? Jewish holidays are the one moment where you can't say that there's something called belief that is also a set of social practices in communities and relations and families, right? And so all of a sudden there's a crisis because religion, how are we going to recognize these Jewish holidays? If we give Jews holidays, then we have to give Muslims holidays, and we give Indian holidays, right? And so, but there was such a political movement around this,
Hang on. Super chat from Nuritu. If Eric July or John Doyle are on Blaze TV next week, then I'm going to be very interested to hear them comment on the Gaza situation. Oh, they ain't going to say shit. They're not going to say shit. I'm sorry. Eric July, I don't really pay attention to, so I can't comment on him either way. He seems to be like a level-headed guy. He's probably, if he comments on it, I'm going to guess he's going to take the whole anti-war, non-foreign intervention for any one aspect. I think he's going to waffle around it that way. John Doyle's going to like talk a big game, or like maybe like to his friends and stuff. But like publicly, John Doyle's not going to say shit. Mark my words. Like he might reference or like he's not gonna, he would fuck himself with the Blaze if he went as aggressively as he probably personally wants to. Would be my guess. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
An effort internal that they don't give you Muslim holidays and Christian and Indian holidays, but they make a Jewish exception, right? And that's the first thing that Marx says. He says the secular state is really just the Christian state hiding through rational structures, and those structures break down the second you break from Christian conceptions of society. So
that means capitalism.
Second, you can't make your religiosity into belief, and it's going to connect you to social production. It's going to connect to all these things. This whole edifice will break down. The second thing he says that's really, really...
Anytime you hear them using the phrase social production, they're talking about like related to the family. Social production comes out of the family. The idea that society will continue to replicate itself. How does society continue to replicate itself? Through the production of little people that occurs in the family.
Rich and interesting in this is he says that why the United States is so religious is because the function of the state is to grant membership in a political community, and that political community is really only the structure of collectivity that validates what he calls individuality or egoistic life. So he says the irony about the secular state is that it says that we're all equal politically.
Hang on, Mountain Goddess, thank you for the super chat. And if they don't believe in hierarchy, who will be their leaders to make sure everyone does their part? Well, that's the question of the hour that they can't answer, because of course there's going to be hierarchy in their society. There's hierarchy in any social system. You look at something like 1984, you have the proletariat, who are just like the poor dregs of society. You have the party members who get to wear like the jumpsuit uniform. And then you have like the higher party members that actually run the whole show that wear a different color uniform. And of course, like they get access to like better food and wine, and they can turn off the 1984 TV and stuff like that. And so, of course, there's going to be hierarchy within their society. And of course, all of these people think they're going to be on like the upper echelon of the hierarchy, when in fact, these people are going to be the first against the wall. They just don't know that yet. But yeah, they really do believe when they use the word utopia, they mean it. I appreciate the super chat.
Because it believes we're all different in our particularity. So it actually promotes our differences. Funny.
They don't like this idea.
I know. It's like
Wow,
running.
what's
We're
that?
moving the SWAT team into position.
It feels a lot like Jurassic Park or something. But so what he says is, he says, look, the thing about the secular state is that its function at the end of the day is to protect egoistic man. It's to protect the flourishing of private life or private differences in civil society. And so, in fact, for him, it is precisely the moment that you see universal human equality that you're going to see an explosion of people who are going to express that human equality as their individual egoistic identities. Yeah, so the more you claim the universal, the more you're going to see people claiming egoistic identities. And so this is going to be another reason why the secular state cannot be the solution to the so-called Jewish problem. Yeah. So think about it. Think about it. In the United States, it's a really good, a very easy example. The second, for example, so we have the religious example of revivalism. How do people know that they are equal to, for example, the elites in the urban areas? They're able to express their egoistic identities through religious freedom, right? Because if you're saying, look, you who are poor and in the rural sector are equal to somebody who is a baron in Massachusetts, for example, what is that equality? It incentivizes you to want to express your equality as your right to egoistic life as well.
Egoistic
so
life.
for Marx, he says the problem of liberal democracy is that universal freedom is the freedom not to be with others, but the freedom to be egoistic man against one another.
Oh. So for Marx, he thinks that freedom is a problem because freedom means that you don't have to be part of the collective and that you can just serve your own goals rather than serving the collective. Let's listen to that part again.
As well. So for Marx, he says the problem of liberal democracy is that universal freedom is the freedom not to be with others, but the freedom to be egoistic man against one another.
So in socialist childcare programs, which they do actually have such a thing, they have socialist childcare programs. I know people think socialists don't have kids. They do. In socialist childcare programs, they make the kids play socialist games that teach the kids how to be part of the collective rather than engaging in competition. So there is actually, I should have bought this game. I really should have. There is actually a socialist version of Monopoly. I have a picture of it. In the socialist version of Monopoly, everyone wins. There's not one winner because everyone is part of the collective. Everyone's contributing to the collective. And so there's not one single winner in socialist Monopoly. Everyone wins because what they're trying to teach kids is that life is not a competition between people. Life is about living to serve other people. Isn't that interesting? Rottweiler says the secular state is a rewarding of the secular state is a rewording of Mao's critique of liberalism. Sure, they are secular for the most part, but to them it lacks social discipline and centralized democracy, aka socialist control. Thank you, Rottweiler, for the super chat. No, it's not participation trophies. This is not participation trophies, because participation trophies still represent that you're some part of a competitive thing. This is about non-competition. It's as if you're getting a trophy for not playing in the game, because when you play a game, you go against each other, right? So this is not participation trophies. This is something different. Let's just listen to this one more time, because I think this is important, and then I'll just let it play.
Well, so for Marx, he says the problem of liberal democracy is that universal freedom is the freedom not to be with others, but the freedom to be egoistic man against one another.
What do you mean by egoistic life?
Yeah. So for him, he really means like the first right is, for example, the right to accumulate, like property rights, right?
Oh!
The right to better your own
property rights. There it is. The first part of an egoistic life is your right to own private property, mother effers. That was so beautiful. That was so beautiful. Did you guys hear that? There was someone in the audience that's like, what do you mean by egoistic? And he's like, it's about private property, bitch.
What do you mean by egoistic life?
Yeah. So for him, he really means like the first right is, for example, the right to accumulate, like property rights, right? The right to better your own conditions and to grow your own wealth, for example. And under liberal democracy, these rights are reduced to the rights of the individual. And so it is the right of individuals to be in competition with one another that is protected by the universal right of property. So in other words, we all have rights to the human. We all get to claim that we are equally human, that my body is mine and your body is yours. But we do that in order to be able to engage in competition with one another. And so we're constantly, when I get the same right.
I really want people to understand this. What these people want is to take away your ability to own anything. Because your ability to buy a home, your ability to buy land, your ability to buy a car, your ability to own a business, your ability to own a house, like an apartment complex that you rent out and become a landlord. All of that, these people think, operate on the basis of you being in competition with other people, which it does, but these people say that is egoistic and bad, and they want to eliminate it.
As you, under liberalism and under capitalism, what that same right really trains me to do is to look at you as a competitive other, right? So how can I exchange with you in a way that's advantageous to me, for example? So rather than giving us, for example, experiences of what makes us communal, it gives us an experience of the communal as the universal right of competition. And so what ends up happening is the first country, the first European country that gives us broad universal rights or broad civil rights, give us the right to treat one another as competitive others, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing, just to add on this, which struck me when I read it again, giving people the same rights is treated under liberalism as giving them the same power. And what Marx, this is a beautiful paragraph, so if I could just do this. He says, if the state, as state, for example, abolishes private property, Mann proclaims private property is overcome politically once he abolishes the property qualification for active and passive voting, as has been done in many North American states. So a man named Hamilton Alexander says the great majority of people have gained a victory over property owners and financial wealth. Is not private property legally abolished, Marx asks, when the have-nots come to legislate for the have?
Is that Philip? Is that Philip? Is Philip making an appearance right now? Oh, Philip, look, you used to look so young.
The property qualification is the last political form for recognizing private property. Yet, he begins in the next paragraph, the political annulment of private property not only does not abolish it, but even presupposes it. The state abolishes distinctions of birth, rank, education, and occupation in its fashion when it declares them to be non-political distinction, when it proclaims that every member of the community, me and Jeff Bezos, can equally vote, participate in popular sovereignty without regard to these distinctions, and when it deals with all elements of the actual life of the nation from the standpoint of the state. Nevertheless, the state permits private property, education, and occupation to act and manifest their particular nature as private property, education, and occupation. In other words, the power continues to exist and sway what goes on. And then he calls liberalism's notion that the political life of the citizen is heaven. You know, we're all equal in heaven, but in the state, in this kind of egoistic thing of competition, some people have amassed more property, are exerting more force over, in fact, what will happen.
Yeah.
So it's a brilliant analogy.
The people who have amassed more property are exerting more force or more power over what will happen. That's the problem. That's where the equity stuff comes in. Well, for them anyway.
Of liberalism, you know, in just these 2 pages, I think.
Yeah. I would say the one thing I would say is just to go on that is that in this essay, the biggest, I think the most powerful and important point that Marx makes is he says that at the core of liberal democracy is a fundamental contradiction, which is that the rights of man will come to contradict the rights of another man. Right? Under liberalism, when you distribute rights universally to everyone, somebody's right is going to contradict with another person's right. And it is a historical struggle that determines how that relationship is going to be managed. So, for example, in the United States, we have a really good example of this in the Dred Scott decision, where in the 1832 decision of Dred Scott, the problem was whether the rights of a black man to claim membership in the state, in the free soil, in Jusoli, how to handle that claim of rights with the right of the slave owner to claim his property and his value contractually. And when those 2 rights came into conflict, Justice Taney had to make a decision. And he said, look, there are no rights that the white man, there are no rights that the black man possesses that the white man must respect. So at that moment, you see the contradiction of liberalism laid out clearly as a racial contradiction. And this is Marx's point, this is going to come up all the time. And that how we resolve that contradiction produces the system of social difference we live in. It's what's going to produce race, it's what's going to produce white supremacy, it's going to produce, because these rights are always going to come into conflict. And the how that line moves is only through historical struggle. There is no way. And so one of the things he says that's really great to go on the Amazon thing, and this is my last thing, that he says, the problem with getting emancipation in the state is that you can only take it as far as it continues to allow for the functioning of civil society. You can't use the state, unless you try to do a different kind of movement, to push those rights beyond the limits that are given in civil society. So he says, so the example he gives are taxes, which I think is great because of this Amazon thing. He says, look, you can go to this, you can make a movement to the state and you can demand forms of emancipation or forms of rights. So, for example, homeless people demanding rights. Yeah, but if you seek emancipation for the state will only give you those rights to the degree that it's going to change property laws a little bit. It's going to tax the rich a bit more. It's going to give us $500 million for housing. Not a bad thing. But what it's trying to reinforce over and over again is that social movements that address the state as the source of their emancipation will always come to be limited by the degree to which the state is, as Philip was saying, always also protecting the structure of civil society. So unless you can change the structure of civil society, property relations, relations, for example, racial relations, gendered relations, etc., you're not going to be able to do more than change the share of the pie itself.
Hang on.
And I think that was one of his most.
I want to listen to that one more time. What they're talking about. Okay, so Sophie has talked about this on multiple occasions. Sophie is our favorite abolish the family socialist. When people ask Sophie how you're going to abolish the nuclear family, what she says is we are going to architect society in order to do it. What that means is that, like, abolish the family doesn't come from, like, creating laws. It doesn't come from a big booming voice of the sky. It comes from making changes throughout all of society that gradually push people away from any desire to be a part of the nuclear family whatsoever. That's how you get rid of it. Like, if you want someone to do something, you have to convince them that it is their, like, women know this. I'm sorry, guys. Women know this. If you want your husband to do something, you have to convince him that it's his idea. You have to architect the conversation in a way. And my husband does this to me too. Like, anytime my husband wants to get takeout, my husband's like, Carlin, do you want Chinese food? Like, like, do you want, and I go, Victor, do you want Chinese food? But it's the same thing with, like, anything else. If you want someone to do something, you have to convince them that it's, like, their idea to do it, and that is the easiest way in order to get them to do something, right? So what he's talking about here is, like, basically the same thing. It's architecting society in a way that people do the things that you want them to do, where they think it's their idea instead of your idea. Let's listen again.
To be limited by the degree to which the state is, as Philip was saying, always also protecting the structure of civil society. So unless you can change the structure of civil society, property relations, relations, for example, racial relations, gendered relations, etc., you're not going to be able to do more than change the share of the pie itself. And I think that was one of his most important insights.
So what he's saying is that Marx said, in order to get to our Marxist utopia, we have to change the structure of society. Does everyone understand that? And what they're doing when they change the structure of society, and yes, this is a great example of that, like how they are gradually trying to erode parental rights right now. There are direct parental rights cannot fall, guys. Parental rights are a big part of this whole thing. That is a structural change to society that will gradually rip apart the nuclear family before like normal people actually even know what's going on. Does that make sense?
And so we could talk, like, for example, I'll just give an example. I think something like Black Lives Matter is a very interesting use of this. Part of the problem that we're in is that we don't know how to make political movements without the language of rights. That is our crisis, right? Liberalism is so complete and so total, we're all so westernized, that we don't even have a way to speak about social change or demanding social transformation or demanding changes in power without using the very language that Marx is critiquing as ultimately going to restrict us. But if you can use the language as Black Lives Matters does, not to seek emancipation in the state, but, for example, as they do, to seek an undoing of the state itself, undoing the repressive force of the state, yeah, then you're starting to use rights in a way that was unimagined by liberalism. So, and I think feminist movements have done this. We have all kinds of examples.
And by the way, guys, do you notice how they aren't even talking about the political right? They're talking about liberalism. Because even in 2018, when Donald Trump was president, that's when this talk was filmed. Even in 2018, they did not see their biggest obstacle to achieving what they wanted to be conservatives. Conservatives are annoying, but they're not the biggest obstacle they're talking about. They talk about liberalism, 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 liberalism over and over and over again. The biggest enemy of the socialist isn't the conservative, it's the liberal.
But when you get Marxist critique, you actually can see what the difference is between what people call a reformist agenda, which wants rights from the state, and agendas that are radical that use the language of rights, but actually seek to undo this bind between the state and our society. And in that undoing, something more radical can happen. I'll stop there. And
I had a thought a while ago, and it only relates to a small part of what you were saying, so apologies for that. But I hadn't read the Marx essay. I think his point about the development of private conscience and interiority.
yeah.
Hang on. Teresa says, Carlin, you predicted BLM would come back in the picture soon, didn't you? Well, this was in 2018, so this was before most people even knew who BLM was. But oh yeah, BLM's coming back in a big way, because what's happening on the far left is that the Black socialists are starting to get pissed off that the queer socialists are getting all the attention. When, remember, in the woke oppression hierarchy, which these people would call progressive stack, but I'm going to call it the woke oppression hierarchy, Black people are still the most oppressed of all the oppressed. Now, Black trans people are the elite of the oppressed, but most trans people and queer people are not Black. And so I think there's consternation among the far left about which group is the most oppressed. And I think the Black socialists are getting a little pissed off that all these white queer socialists are getting all the attention. So yeah, I think we're going to see not necessarily a resurgence of Black Lives Matter specifically, because I think that they know enough to know that that brand is not going to work. But in terms of critical race theory was never pulled out of schools, guys. Even with all the so-called anti-CRT laws, none of those laws actually prevent the teaching of critical race theory. You can still teach it in every state that has an anti-CRT law. It never went away. The conservative media just stopped covering it. So we are going to see a resurgence of it. I'm positive of that. Between now and the 2024 election, that we absolutely are, for sure.
I would say the Protestant Reformation, more than Catholic, is connected or is the progenitor of private rights, state rights, and property rights, and etc. So, yeah. I'm not sure how that applies to Catholicism, though, where ritual and community is much more important.
Yeah.
But beyond that, you were talking about, of course, the revival of that position, right? But in this church, she met a lot of Black people, and not just that. I guess my point was, people, I think, go to these churches not just to sort of assert their equality with the elites, but also for community that is lacking, that's totally lacking now.
Yeah.
I mean, in the United States. I don't know about in the 1830s so much, but now, what she had for friends, what she had for a support group, what she had for people to come to her when she was ill, was this church. and some of whom were black, and she became friends with some of these.
Aha! Pizza Man, the contradictions of the socialist, rules for thee but not for me. Why do they have a hierarchy of oppression when they don't believe in hierarchies? So I call it the woke oppression hierarchy. They are not going to call it that. They call it the progressive stack because what they're doing, it's a way of queering the social order of society, where basically they say, in society, cisgendered white men are always the ones who are listened to. They always have an advantage because of systemic racism, blah, 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 blah. And so because cisgendered white men have an advantage, we want to flip the social hierarchy in the capitalist order on its head, and we want to put the most disadvantaged, or the most proletariat of the proletariat, I guess, we want to put the most disadvantaged first as a way of fighting back against the capitalist order. So it's not really a hierarchy in the way that they don't think of it as a hierarchy, because they view it as a way of fighting capitalism, essentially. Does that make sense? It's about equity. They're balancing out the inherently unequal capitalist order and trying to make things more equitable.
People. I mean, I'm as distant from Pentecostal beliefs as you could possibly imagine, but I see both the need for that kind of community and the way that desperate and misguided as it isn't entirely bad.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that, well, that also relates to, you talk about like this language of rights versus, I was thinking about in the feminist context, like this idea of care and like this kind of more of a sort of organization outside of the state. I mean, I live in the South, so religion is very important to some, Southern culture, and I see that just through daily experiences of, it is organized a lot through religion, but also radical feminist organizing. This idea of care, I think, is important and sort of subverts some of this idea of seeking, going to the state for, it seems in some ways a kind of opposition.
Yeah.
When you speak of going to the state, what rights talk goes to is the judicial system.
Philip.
It's the judicialization of what would be possible.
So is the woke progressive hierarchy about destabilizing the system and attack on capitalism? I don't necessarily think it's about that. It honestly is just a way they run their meetings. So if you've ever seen like the crazy, what was it, the 2019 Democratic Socialists of America meeting where they were all arguing about like who's next in line and all that stuff, that really does happen in socialist meetings. Now they've gotten their shit together since they went viral on the internet for looking like whack jobs, right? But like that sort of thing where they do put trans people first in line and then black people and then like for questions and for speaking time, that really does happen in socialist meetings. And so I think it's less about that specific thing. They're not necessarily, well, when they're doing it in their meetings, like and talking about it like this, it's more a way of just how they're structuring their society. But when they're trying to push like the oppression stuff, like the virtue signal points, all that stuff, it is a way of destabilizing the system because they're basically trying to queer the system by going against what we typically do. So you're right about that. Yeah. All good, bro. I appreciate you asking so many good questions.
Politics. So I would read it a little differently from John. That I wouldn't call what we have liberal democracy. I would call it liberalism. Pure, and with no democracy, essentially, not even aspirations toward it. I think what's interesting about the community experiences you talk about is even within the strictures of this particular religion, that sort of thirst for some kind of equality and democracy within and care for one another, which they don't get from the liberal state, can be created in both, anarcho left communes and even in
even like
evangelical.
And like recently, I don't know how we.
Aha. What have I been saying all week? The reason that the left is siding with Palestine is because the Jews are the ultimate symbol of capitalist oppression for the left. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm saying that, I mean, I don't want any of my words taken out of context now that Nick Fuentes is my internet boyfriend or anything. But socialists really do believe that. And I say that because Akshay is saying, so the Jewish question is really the private property question, the capitalist question. They haven't actually talked about the Jewish question, but they've talked a lot about private property. Isn't that interesting? I might actually have to lower myself to read the essay, which I hate reading socialist philosophy. I fucking hate it. James Lindsay reads philosophy and I watch stuff like this, okay? But I may actually have to lower myself to read the philosophy behind it because this actually makes sense to me. Is this essay really all about private property and capitalism, and that's the key to the Jewish question? Because I mean, if Jews are a symbol of capitalism, which is the oppressor, and Palestinians are a symbol of the oppressed because they're being oppressed by the evil Jew, and I'm saying this is what socialists believe, like, that makes sense to me.
People who go to the internet or whatever to raise money for cancer, like this, like,
or Red
sort of, like, yeah, exactly, like, because there's no, like, this complete vacancy there, and so I don't know, I mean, and that's, of course, horrible in its own way, but I think there's a kind of self-organization.
There's an attempt to fill a void.
That
we are not getting through the absence of a democratic community and a liberal community, which is a contractual community. All the myths of liberalism from political theory, which starts in this, about the time of the birth of capitalism, or a bunch of people are in the state of nature. They agree to form a society in one way or another, and they can withdraw from it if they like, because the individual precedes society. It's not the Aristotelian man as a political animal or something like that.
Hang on. Do they have any actual Jews there? I'm going to bet not. Why would they? Why would they? Bunch of white hippies. He did admit to falling in love with me last night. All right. We all saw the video. We all know what happened. I'm just acknowledging it. I can enjoy this. This is an unexpected turn. I never expected Nick Fuentes to have a crush on me. Like, like I said, I have my socialists that have crushes on me too. This is not foreign territory. I'm allowed to have fun with this, okay? It's fun, it's playful, it's banter, it's not serious. I'm fucking married. Like, it's just, it's interesting. It's an arc I didn't expect, all right? I'm enjoying it. Just let it be, bro. Let it be. Not everything has to be controversial.
Like that. So I really think that what we're looking for on the left is to get rid of this use of rights talk to look for because we are handing it off to the Supreme Court or the Constitution, and talk about those broad democratic majorities from below, democratic power, and how one frames that.
Actually, I wanted to ask. I'm sorry. I was just going to say something. You said something very provocative last week. I think it was you. In the Friday night session about taking pleasure in loss. And I thought actually this is maybe quite a good moment to ask you to expound upon that, because it's maybe about giving up the egoistic man.
Private property.
Human, whatever.
Egoistic means property.
Is that related to what we're talking
Absolutely.
about?
Absolutely. 100%. And I think it's what you're saying about care as an alternative. But yeah, I mean, I think, just to say that very quickly, one of the reasons that this early Marx work is so interesting to so many people, that's so different than the later Marx, is in the early Marx, he really is thinking about what it means that, how much work we have to do to reshape our subjectivities. And he gives up the question of subjectivity entirely in the late Marx. In the late Marx, it's all about what you do with the rationality of capital, how you can turn the rationality of capital for socialist ends. But in the early Marx, this is where he's actually saying what capitalism, the version of capitalism that he's thinking of here, what capitalism is the colonization of collective life itself and the remaking of collective life in its own units of interest. So
hang on. Okay. Let's listen back to this. Rewind, fucker. There it is. Okay. What he just said is capitalism is the colonization of collective life. Now, we've heard a lot about the word colonization in the last week, haven't we? Colonization, to break it down to the most simple possible terms, colonization means the taking of property to make it private property, the taking of something that was part of the collective property to make it private property. Remember, private property is the number one enemy of socialists. It's not white people, it's not straight people, it's not any of those things. Private property. So when they say colonization, they mean some sort of oppressive force driven by capitalism has come in, taken collective property, community property, and they've made it private. Okay? So what he just said, capitalism is the colonization of the collective. Capitalism is the insertion of privatization, private property into the collective. Let's listen again. And yes, he is arguing that the collective, these people say this all the time. Communism is I learned this in International Relations 101 at Boston University of all places. My intro to IR class, which was at 8 a.m. in Morse Auditorium at Boston University, I was taught by Billy Corgan's uncle that communism is the highest of all form of society. So yes, they believe that communism, collectivism, is the highest of all form of society. Let's listen again.
What capitalism, the version of capitalism that he's thinking of here, what capitalism is the colonization of collective life itself and the remaking of collective life in its own units of interest. So it's not
the remaking of collective life in its own units of interest. Its own units of interest mean individualism. Individualism, private property. What else did they say? The egoist.
not so. For example, religious communities. It's not that you can't be sub-communities within communities. It's that sub-community, all these communities are seen as individuals getting together and becoming a community. So the unit of the individual is already the basic unit of community. And once you have that, you're in kind of liberal capitalist rationality. And so what Marx can do in this essay that he can't do later because this is what he calls species being. In species being, you can actually think, maybe I'm not an individual. Maybe I am part of this species being.
What?
And that the I only exists in however the species is.
Mm-hmm.
The I only exists in whatever the species, the collective is. This is quite literally the Borg. That's what communism is. It is the Borg.
And so if the species needs, for example, need to give my labor freely, I do that as my freedom in the species.
Right.
Where you're not even, it's not an I there, right, in the same way. And so that's what the Jewish question can do. And it's exactly against the liberal legalism that Philip is talking about. Right. And so that's, I think, the richness of this early work.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of question a little bit, like when you say Black Lives Matter is doing that. Like I absolutely respect and admire, but like, some things with, care that we're talking about, like religion, like Sylvia Federici, who I am a huge fan of and love everything about.
Absolutely.
But she'll start talking about communities of care and self-management in ways that actually mirror the way that capital sloughs off the work into these voluntaristic groupings and collectivities. And so I feel like all these demands for something beyond rights discourse or something beyond what civil society can give you, they hit a structural limit, right? Where you kind of have to think about where, are we really living that, or are we volunteering all our little free time away? You know what I mean?
Yeah, individuals who are really just doing community.
Yeah, exactly. So how, and even with Black Lives Matter, I don't know if we can say as a whole, that it it is somehow going beyond that, not through any fault of the participants, but through those structural constraints.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think that this is a battle inside movements.
Right.
And I think that's why I think this essay is helpful, is it can tell you what how our brains are habituated by rights.
Exactly.
And what it means to think beyond them, So one place I think that BLM, for example, has an opening is, recently, and Jordan works on this, so I hope he speaks up, but recently, Angela Davis, for example, had said that she didn't think Black Lives Matter could have gotten off the ground without the Palestinian movement in Gaza after the 2013 invasion. And you saw so many Palestinians making connections with Ferguson and with the experience of living under a military regime, but also the experience of living in an open prison. And I think that where that's a moment of species being, where you've encountered a group that you didn't think was your group, and you can't say we're both demanding human rights. What you can say is, what is our shared history that connects U.S. empire to the Israeli settler state and Zionism? What is the shared relations that produce the possibility of us seeing one another? And if we could do all of that, we're in species being.
Did it actually say this? Did it actually say this verbatim? I'm gonna need to go back and listen to this again. Remember, guys, this is why we watch socialism right fucking here. Because this was a talk that was given in 2018, guys. 2018. And if they're saying that Black Lives Matter couldn't have gotten off the ground if not for Palestinians, if we had seen this talk back in 2018 or even a couple years ago or whatever, we would have had a preview for what's going on right now. This is why we watch socialism. Okay, let me go back. Sorry I missed that specific sentence. I was knitting. Hang on. Oh, I see it. Oh, Angela Davis. Okay, I see it. Okay, play.
It works on this, so I hope he speaks up. But recently, Angela Davis, for example, had said that she didn't think Black Lives Matter could have gotten off the ground without the Palestinian movement in Gaza.
Wow.
After the 2013 invasion.
And hang on, I've got to clip that. While we're here, I'm just going to clip that. That's going to be a good clip for me to put out there. But before I do that, I want to say, Pizza Man, do you think anyone in this talk actually understands the worldview they're advocating for? No private life, property, not raising the children, the state. Yes, they do. They 100% understand what they're asking for. There is no question that they trust me, bro. Like, come back to Socialism Saturdays, hang out with us. You will see over and over and over and over and over again. They believe that right now they do not live in a free society. They believe a free society will only exist when they achieve the things that you've got in the comment here. All right, let me clip this real quick. Hang on one sec.
I hope he speaks up. But recently, Angela Davis, for example, had said that she didn't think Black Lives Matter could have gotten off the ground without the Palestinian movement in Gaza after the 2013 invasion. And you saw so many Palestinians making connections with Ferguson and with the experience of living under a military regime, but also the experience of living in an open prison. And I think that where that's a moment of species being, where you've encountered a group that you didn't think was your group, and you can't say we're both demanding human rights. What you can say is, what is our shared history that connects US empire to the Israeli settler state and Zionism? What is the shared relations that produce the possibility of us seeing one another? And if we could do all of that, we're in species being. And something about US Blackness can be transformed by learning the histories of Palestinians. And that, I think, is species being. When your sense of self is transformed by the history of someone you can't see as just other nationalities, other rights bearers of another state, then you're in species being. And I do think that that conversation is happening in some parts of BLM, and there's some parts that are very nationalist. And so I absolutely think you're right.
Can you talk a little bit more about?
All right, I just want to get this clip all set up. Hang on. All right, I've got the clip. I will deal with that later. Pizza Man says, imagine your mom thinking you would be better off raised by the state instead of her. Well, what these people think, though, Pizza Man, is so remember about the idea of equity, right? So the idea of equity is that we're getting rid of all private property so everyone has equal outcomes. Equal outcomes are the goal. When you have the nuclear family inherently creates inequality because some families are just better financially off than other families. And so you can never achieve equity if you believe that equity, communism, is the highest of all form of society, which these people do believe, then you need to get rid of every single thing that creates inequity. The nuclear family is one of those things that creates inequity because it privatizes care, privatizes resources, and doesn't make the same types of resources available for everyone. Does that make sense?
Because I don't know this, about how Black Lives Matter is using the discourse of rights, but also somehow subverting it.
Mm-hmm. Jordan, do you want to say something? Jordan's written like 2 books on this. That's why I'm turning to.
I'm not sure. Well, this is just really helpful. I've learned tons from the presentation. Thank you for this work. And all of your work, Shanda, I think helps us understand how kind of emancipatory movements in the past can get conscripted in the service of capitalism and empire. And it seems like it's a long dialogue between Marx that we're seeing the fruit of today. But I think you can see some of the tensions and contradictions that Shanda's talking about in the Movement for Black Lives platform. Have you seen this?
This is their platform of what their demands are.
The internet,
Yeah.
So, on one hand, it's for, things like they want to see an end to police violence. They want to see jobs. It's really pretty systematic. How many people have seen and so, there's elements there that I think are in the way that Chanda's talking about. There's making language to address change that are not simply reformist, but they kind of exceed the capacities of the capitalist state, right?
Yeah, for real. Lots of white people.
Kind of elementary platform for access to liberal democracy that the state can actually demand.
What's an example of something that exceeds the? Because police reform is not, obviously.
Yeah.
Jobs, maybe, you could put more money into training for African Americans. The state could satisfy, well, not successfully, but could try to satisfy that demand that way. So what's something that's completely beyond the state's ability to appropriate?
I don't think any of those things are beyond the state. Sounds like this person has something to say.
Maybe there's one example, since they borrowed from Palestine, or because they were influenced by Palestine, the Palestinian practice of al-Masha, which he called an architecture artist residency, and Brent Moten had written about, where rather than appealing to the Israeli state for a land claim, Palestinians just continue to sort of like cultivate commonly held lands, and it actually makes it harder to expropriate them than if they were leveraging a specific legal claim or were sort of as a singular family unit inhabiting a piece of land permanently. cycling through areas makes it more difficult because they're not adhering to the logic of the state in the first place. Their claim is in excess of it. So.
And let me give it, Elise, do you want to say?
I would just say, in some ways, there's such a simple answer, which is just the hashtag itself, which is, Black Lives Matter, which is, I think there's an appeal to a version of the human which does not exist within the confines of the way in which the claim to entitlement is produced within the history of the US state. And so, to reconcile, this is the Du Boisian question, to reconcile Blackness with humanity is actually outside of the state's, or that's what we've learned, right?
And I mean,
and state's capacity.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, but it's, in some ways, it's so simple. So the whole, and I think that's why saying that there's an internal division within the movement, it doesn't come down to the platform. It comes down to the take on what it means to make that appeal at all.
I think it was an extraordinarily effective slogan, particularly because it was quite obvious that when you saw visually, Black lives didn't matter. And the gap between that simple statement, that statement was in fact, Black lives don't matter, even though it said Black lives matter. That's how people read it. I think when they, observers who felt Gattungswesen and, a species being with others looked at it. It's so obvious that they don't matter that, here it's being said. So in a way, it's one of those things like the 1%, just that phrase, that opens up, that creates an opening in political discourse, that more can go through, I think. So
I do think that there are, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, so this is very complicated from the way Marx proceeds, as I understand it. First place, we were talking earlier, or at least Annie was talking earlier today, about shortening the working day. Now, if you look at Marx's critique of the Go-To program, and it talks about we don't want wage labor. We want to transcend wage labor. We don't want to. But yet he is supporting
We want to transcend wage labor. What does that mean? We just watched an anti-work lecture last week. What does it mean to want to transcend wage labor in the land of the socialist? Any ideas in the chat? I love how multiple people on both YouTube and Rumble commented on the men crossing their legs. On Rumble, Pixel Propaganda over on Rumble is like, they're all effeminate men. Crossing legs like that and holding them tight together is the opposite of masculine signal to females. Weak men like that are not capable of building society. Well, that may be true. No, what does it mean to transcend wage labor? What do they mean, guys? We just watched the anti-work lecture last week. Come on, I know you guys can do it. Not seeing it yet. Okay. So to get rid of capitalism, what you need to do is get rid of the profit motive. If you don't have the profit motive and you don't have private property, then the only reason that someone would need to be go to work would be to produce things that are required to support the state, required to support individuals, but you're not producing excess. Profit motives are created by excess production, okay? When you get rid of the excess production, you reduce the amount of labor that needs to be done. Exactly, Pizza Man's got it. You're working for the collective. You're working to produce what is necessary to the collective, and in return, the collective provides you with like a universal basic income. The collective provides you with a place to live. The collective provides you with all your health care. The collective provides you with education. The collective is going to give you everything you need. And in return, you're going to do a couple hours of work a week. And yes, they really do believe this, because when you eliminate the profit margin and that therefore eliminate a lot of the garbage that's produced in the world by private businesses, you don't need to work as much in order to fuel society. That's what they mean. Well, this is what it means in reality, but they don't know that. What are they going to do with all their time? They're going to be artists, of course. They're going to be artists and philosophers and poets and you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Shortening the working man. He's also, Marx was also supportive of electoral politics and participating in electoral politics. Lenin was in a similar way supportive of being involved in that level of politics of the state, but yet in his April Theses talked about, you know, we need to go beyond, we need to have a revolution.
Yeah.
And so I think that these things ultimately, and maybe Marx wasn't thinking it in those terms at that time, he was only 24, I guess, but we need to talk about what the actual material, the actual historical moment, and what is possible within that historical moment, and what should people be doing. If there's a big movement for shortening the working day, then we should support that movement. And I think Marx would agree with that. And I'm curious to see what you think about these sort of, that it's not as clear as it seems to be in the way he writes the Jewish.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that everyone's bringing up is, you know, in the Jewish question, there's a scholar named Ruth Wilson Gilmore who works a lot on post-industrial complex and Black social movements, and she comes up with this phrase called, which I think is what you're talking about, non-reformist reforms.
Precisely.
How do we participate in a reform movement that doesn't recapitulate what we would call political emancipation? And so I'll give you just a concrete example, you know, in our time, which is affirmative action. So affirmative action, if you think about what happened in 64 and 68 as African Americans gaining civil rights, and you think of what that means as African Americans being able to participate in determining the collective community, the political community. So for the first time, African Americans get the right to vote in reality in the South. They get to participate in the institutions of society, like educational institutions, business, and so on. And in Marx's account, all of those civil rights are that you're being allowed to create the collective political community. Now, if that collective political community is a liberal democracy, you create it only to the degree that it upholds competition in civil society. And so in the case of affirmative action, some people think of affirmative action as trying to rectify past ills and trying to rethink meritocracy. You know, and it's like, oh, you know what? It's not just test scores, it's also people's hardship. And we can calculate hardship and we can connect it together and we can get these people into those institutions. But if you're an anti-reformist reform movement, you think about affirmative action as undoing the white supremacy of the educational system. It's not how many people get in, it's how do we undo the white supremacy of the educational system. And undoing the white supremacy of the educational system might be ultimately open admissions, right? Like it can go anywhere, but that's the difference in the Marx account of
Please let them tell Harvard they have to have open admissions. Please let that happen. That would be incredible.
When reform creates, recreates the liberal political community, and when you could use a reform and push it to realize histories that liberal political community tries to suppress.
Okay, Teresa. Teresa's trying to figure out how immigration plays into all of this. Teresa, these people don't believe borders should exist. These people don't really believe countries should exist. And so the immigration problem actually becomes moot under this because it's open borders chaos. Congratulations.
Because his argument is the way liberalism, Christian liberalism works, Christians had all the advantages and they secularized and they baked in their advantages. And so it's just like masculinity. Masculinity had all the advantages of liberalism and it's secularized. And so every time women, for example, deal with health, to go with ethics of care, you have to use it as personal rights. Think about the abortion debate. The whole abortion debate is because the system is skewed towards men, right? And so that's Marx's point, is that these secular systems are actually hiding a particular group's advantage and biased groups as well. And that it's only the reforms that can actually imagine our histories together and imagine what it means to actually share history and not to have it partitioned by rights, that we get somewhere. I hope that makes sense.
Okay.
Can I ask about the logic you mentioned that Marx specifies or doesn't? What's the formalism of that maneuver that gives people abstract citizenship, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah.
And how does that relate to how developed civil society is today, rather than from Marx's time?
What do you mean by the last part?
Like, okay, for instance, I was at AAAS and I saw your presentation with Left Eye and like his claim, guy's claim. I don't know how to just describe it further, who he was. But the sort of maneuver that he was claiming, the horizontal maneuvers that he was claiming in Missouri, rather than, just a rights claim to the state, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Because there's no formal recognition for feeling oppressed or feeling jaded or being disappointed politically.
A little confused. I didn't see that presentation, so I don't totally know.
No, you gave it.
Oh, you're talking about my presentation at AAAS.
I don't even recognize that.
I wasn't even child back then.
Yeah. Okay, let me think about what I was saying.
I'd like to say I am an other, like Ron.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can talk later because I have to think about it. At least.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So I came to here, Tondon, because I wanted to learn how to teach this essay. And I just, in the Marx course, which some of you heard me discussing in the last, and Tondon's the other person.
Teaching a Marx course in college.
That's great. I learned. Thank you. But here's my question. I think this opening that's created in the early Marx is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And it kind of it raises this question to me about what happens when we do the juxtaposition. What closes down when we move to capital and to the discussion of value. And, I experienced this in the last session, which I felt was a closing down of the possibilities in that text in a certain way. And I think that what you're suggesting is that there's a necessary juxtaposition of the old Marx, the early Marx, and the later Marx, that forces an interruption of the refusal of the earlier attention to the superstructure and to species being, and even to the utopian humanist impulses within that essay, because I think it's a utopian essay.
Yeah, it is.
In a really intensive way. So it's just, there's some really interesting questions about what it means to think it together, which for those of us that have been sitting in these rooms together today have actually been doing. So that we did chapter 25, which is the question.
General law of accumulation.
Yeah. So
no, it's true.
It's just it just raises some really interesting issues about politically, where do we return? And where do we get the grist for the activism that we might want to do, or the pedagogy that we might want to do, the kinds of messaging out of Marx into the world that we live in now that we want to do.
No, I think that's right. And I do think, the other thing that I think is a contradiction in this essay is that in this essay, what's great about this essay is that Marx doesn't have a base superstructure yet. Right. And that's what makes it so interesting. He can't go to an economism because he doesn't have a base superstructure division yet. But what is difficult about this essay is he is a humanist. So he still believes that what Europe has discovered is what the human really is. That there is something called the human that all of us on this planet share. And so for him, you can get rid of the state in part because we all share the capacity of humankind. But if the human doesn't, if that's a ruse, if now, Marx still believes in that, but if that is not true, that there isn't something called a universal human that all of us share, then I think the question of what is the political form becomes vital again. So, so in other words, in this essay, Marx can get rid of sovereignty because we are all humans. But if you can't rely on this idea of the universal human that he has, then you really can't get rid of sovereignty. And then these questions of the state and of state power really come back. And there are people, for example, who work on the Indian Ocean trade who are looking at overlapping sovereignties and other theories of sovereignty that don't come out of the Christian tradition of the Christian state that Marx is talking about. But this, I think, is a big problem, is Marx's solution presumes humanism, and if we can't presume that, then some of these problems really return.
Isn't it something that you mean by humanism?
Sorry?
Sorry, you mean by humanism?
Yeah, so Marx thinks that there is kind of an architecture that that describes all of us. For example, that it's easiest in use value. That's the easiest way to give it. In Marx, there's exchange value and use value is all the things that are useful to you. For example, clothing is useful because you need it to go into the world, like a coat. Food is useful because you need caloric intake, etc. But use value for Marx is still an abstraction because it's all the things the human being needs, and you and I are just examples of the human being. So for Marx, it's not like you have Chinese cuisine and Mexican cuisine and Italian. It's that you have to get 2,000 calories a day. And everybody needs 2,000 calories a day to survive. And once you can get into that level of abstraction, where I'm not Indian and you're not American, we're just...
And in Marx's world, the 2,000 calories a day will be provided to you by the state in the communal kitchen. You will not have a private kitchen in your home. You will have no need for it because when you want to get your 2,000 calories a day, you go to the public kitchen. And the people who are assigned to work in the public kitchen will be cooking the food that equal out to 2,000 calories a day. And if you don't go to your assigned job, a job that you have no say in because it's assigned by the collective, then you don't get your 2,000 calories a day.
2,000 caloric and sort of beings needed, that is the human for Marx. And so for Marx...
So that's what you mean by humanism?
Exactly.
That fundamental idea.
Fundamental, and that's what sort of liberal rights is predicated upon. That you and I are abstractions of the human, and that my culture is just my particular expression of the human, and your culture is yours. But if you can't make that division, and you can't say, actually, you know what, this idea of humanism where everyone is 2,000 calories being of some sort, yeah, can end up producing all kinds of divisions still, then you're in trouble.
Well, maybe
That's
we
a species.
Yeah.
That's the thing, that's species being, and he believes in it, but I don't know if it's possible.
Right.
But doesn't he believe in it to the end? Didn't he always believe in species?
Yeah, he holds on to this humanism. That's why he doesn't think we need a state in capital. And in a way,
But
China is an
there's
example.
this early moment that's
Yes.
captured in this essay. That's kind of what I'm
Yes,
saying.
this early moment is
This
interesting.
early moment captures something that goes missing.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's the possibility of an acknowledgement of difference.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a way to stop playing two Marxes off against each other and raise your hand for the one that you think you want to follow, whether it's the humanist young Marxist.
Well, I think Elisa's saying you need both.
I'm saying you can't do that.
No, I'm going to talk about three Marxes. Okay. So I'm going to see if I
Marx
can.
Brothers.
So, Harpo, Chico, and Gotcha. So, my notion is, and maybe I'm just trying to cast out the stuff I don't want to use and keep in the other. But my notion starts with Heinrich that it's an unfinished work. It's a project that we all collectively become Marx to use the elements that orient.
Beth, thank you for the super chat. Queen Beth says, do they have a parrot? Seems appropriate. Polly want a cracker. I don't know that they have a parrot, Beth, but someone does definitely have Twitter, because it really was Twitter back then on their phone. All right, guys, we have less than 10 minutes left. If you've made it this long, you might as well stay till the end. Great job today, everyone, especially the new people that showed up. Really good questions. I hope everyone learned a little something on the stream. If you learned anything, now would be a great time to pop it in the chat, what you learned today, so we can all make sure we're taking away some lessons from this. Let's wrap up, and I'll look forward to seeing what you guys learned in the chat.
Us towards the key questions and sort of finish and refine in notion about political experience as we go. The Marx I have no use for is the base superstructure Marx, the stages Marx, the locomotive of history Marx, the science of history. There's this follows this follows this. The three stages, that seems to me to be, you find that in so many 19th century thinkers like Auguste Comte or so forth, or Lewis Henry Morgan, the good one, that there are three stages. The kind of historicism that just seems so 19th century that's not me. So I don't go for that. Base superstructure is not something that Marx uses in Capital. I think he uses it one or two times. It's what I think what we're dealing with is what attracts us in the young Marx is precisely whatever it is that draws us into being indignant about injustice, as Chris Marker would say, in his movies. And whatever it is, call it species being, or don't have to mystify it as some kind of humanism with a capital H. There's something in those things that we do respond to, and we want to try to find a way to have it orient our political lives. Yeah. But I think the important point is that this third Marx, who is one that I was only introduced to after the financial crisis and after I had passed retirement age, was that Mr. Marx went to England after making all sorts of depictions of capitalism before having ever seen it up close. And for some, 30 years, whatever, he literally went to the library, he read these factory inspector reports. No one had ever, and all the theories of the English economists, no one had ever studied any social phenomenon in this degree ever. I mean, this is the beginning of social theory. It was the beginning of the history of technology. A lot of things just spring out of Marx's overcoat, as people say about Gogol. But what I would like to say is, what he's looking at in England is, what is this beast called capitalism? What's the model? What's in the engine room? How does it work? And he gets to the point that it is about MCM prime and it's about accumulation. And it has all sorts of different instantiations in history, social form. It has qualities of rebounding or rebuilding itself that we don't know, and we're only finding out now. But I think rather than calling that model capitalocentric, or even finding it a distinctively Marxian method, isn't that like what science, basic science that we know does? Where it comes up, tries to go beyond the appearance and come up with a model of phenomenon, revise it if things don't work, go back and study. I mean, the man was notorious for saying, I can't write this now, Mr. Engels. I need to do some research about what just happened. I read it in the paper for another 10 years. So we need that Marx, and we need the early Marx. We need that model of capitalism because that's the enemy. And we need to know what it can't do, what people are asking it to do in the NGOs and the human rights thing. They're sensitive to exploitation. They want an NGO to cure it. But capital will regenerate it in some way when the truth dies. So both understanding the critique of political economy, without calling it capitalocentric, and yet looking for the way we organize, way beyond Marx or Lenin or any of them, to just look at what's happening now and where it's coming up and learn from how people are sort of organizing that
that collectivity that we want to replace liberal individualism.
Yeah. Yeah, the one thing I will say is just that, we can stop here, is I think that this critique of humanism is very important because this was the problem of state socialism. State socialism could imagine everyone as 2,000 caloric beings. Yeah, so it could move populations for a managed economy, and that was in the interest of justice, right? And so even, for example, if you take climate change to go with what Philip is saying, we're in a series of things where on the one hand, we need the rational abstraction of science to know whether temperatures are rising or falling, how much CO2 we can emit as a species, quote unquote. But when we look at who pays for what it means to reduce carbon footprint or what it means to reduce the temperature, it is population movement. It's indigenous people not being able to have sovereignty over waters and lands and streams. It's all of these, and those are the two marks together. So in a way, this is the kind of richness. And I think one way to think about species being in a useful way is we have a teacher who used to call it this, is to demonumentalize species being. To imagine, demonumentalize it. So not to imagine that we are humans together, but in the small h, like, I think we're together, but I don't know our history yet. And I can't presume I can know it until we start really, really getting into it,
There's also the issue of just, the major topic in so much of political theory of human nature. When we talk about humanism, one of the most fundamental aspects of humanism is what is the nature of human nature. And he really emphasizes, I think,
thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks.
In the later work that human nature does not have any constant. It has no constants whatsoever. It's completely a product of the mode of production. You have a proletarian human nature, you have a communist human nature, you have a capitalist human nature, you have a feudalist human nature. So there is no, in some ways you could read Marx against Marx, I think, especially with respect to humanism, through that actual question of human nature.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that was an unexpected abrupt ending, but I guess that is what it is for today. So guys, I think this was a really productive Socialism Saturday. I appreciate all you guys coming out. As a reminder, I will not be streaming tomorrow because Sundays are my day off, but we will be meeting for movie night in the supporter Discord, and we will be watching Beetlejuice for tomorrow for movie night at 8 p.m. in the supporter Discord. If you want to get access to that, head over to my Substack, Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Subscribe for $8 a month or $80 a year. You can also subscribe in my locals community, my Patreon, become a Twitter subscriber, or become a member of this here YouTube channel. That is all we have for today. One final super chat from Tom. Thank you, Karlyn, for what you do. I've learned a lot of important things through your channel. I really do appreciate that, Tom. Guys, I will be back on Monday with more content. I don't know what we'll be talking about. We'll have to see. But I do look forward to seeing you guys for movie night tomorrow. Keep an eye out on the Unwoke Roundup newsletter for all your information about the links for the community Zooms and for the supporter Discord. I will be sending that out tomorrow at some point. But for now, I'm going to go relax and chill out. Maybe have another beer. But guys, take care. Have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you soon. Bye.